What if Naruto carried a bloodline so ancient that even the hidden leaf forgot it ever existed? Everyone thought Naruto Uzumaki was just an ordinary genin with the 9 tails sealed inside him. But deep within his blood slept the power of an ancient dragon, a power that awakened during the Chunin Exams, a power that granted him incredible strength, heightened senses, and eyes that made even veteran shinobi uneasy. Now, after revealing a glimpse of that power in battle, the entire shinobi world has begun asking the same question. Who or what is Naruto Uzumaki? As powerful enemies begin watching from the shadows and old secrets rise from history, Naruto must master the dragon within before it consumes him. This is the story of What If Naruto Awakened the Ancient Dragon Bloodline. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. The gate rattled open with a groan of old iron, and beyond it the forest of death exhaled. That was the only way Naruto Uzumaki could describe it, not the sight of it, though the sight was bad enough. A black wall of trees so tall they swallowed the morning light and turned it into something dim and green and wrong. It was the smell, a slow, warm breath of rot and moss and something metallic underneath, like the forest had been chewing on something for a very long time and hadn't finished yet. Cheerful, Naruto muttered, scratching the back of his head. Beside him, Sakura Haruno's hand had drifted to the strap of her pack, tightening it for the 3rd time in the last minute. It's called the Forest of Death, Naruto. What did you expect, flowers? I mean, some flowers would be nice. You're an idiot. You say that like it's news. Sasuke Uchiha said nothing. He stood a half step ahead of them both, dark eyes fixed on the tree line, weight balanced forward on the balls of his feet the way it always was right before something happened. Naruto had learned to read that stance over the last few weeks. Not that he'd ever admit to studying Sasuke that closely. It just meant pay attention. The proctor, a scarred, heavy-set man named Anko Mitarashi, stood at a folding table with a stack of scrolls and a grin that didn't belong anywhere near this many teenagers. Listen up, maggots, she said, sliding 2 scrolls across the table. A heaven scroll and an earth scroll for each team, though every team would only ever hold one of the 2. You've got 5 days to get both scrolls to the tower in the center of this forest. Kill each other, don't kill each other. I genuinely don't care. Just don't lose your scroll, and don't die. Well, she shrugged. Try not to die. It looks bad on my paperwork. That's comforting, Sakura said under her breath. Kakashi Hatake, arms crossed, one eye crinkled in that lazy smile of his, had said his goodbyes to them an hour earlier. Trust each other, he told them, in that voice that always sounded like he was thinking about 6 other things at once. That's the whole test, really? Everything else is scenery. Naruto had nodded like he understood. He hadn't, not really. Not yet. Team 7 was handed an earth scroll, a slim wooden cylinder wrapped in white paper, and assigned Gate 12. They filed toward it in silence, the low murmur of the other genin teams fading behind them, replaced by the creak of branches and, somewhere deep in the canopy, a sound like something large shifting its weight. Okay, Sakura said, once they were alone at their gate, voice pitched low. Strategy. We need a heaven scroll. We should try to find a weaker team first, take them by surprise, get it done fast, and then hole up somewhere defensible until the timer runs out. Sounds good to me, Naruto said, cracking his knuckles. Believe it, I'll find us the weakest team in the whole forest, and we'll be at that tower by lunch. You're not finding anything, Sasuke said, not looking at him. You'll get us caught. We move quiet, we move fast, and you don't talk unless I say so. Hey! Naruto's face went hot. I can be quiet. You've said 4 sentences since we got here and 2 of them were about flowers. Sakura pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead. Can we not do this right now? Please? We're about to go into a forest that eats people. A horn sounded, distant and brassy, cutting through the trees. The gates swung open. That's it, Sakura said. Go, 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 they went. The forest closed over them like water. Naruto had been in forests before. Training grounds, the wooded hills outside the village where Iruka-sensei used to take them for survival exercises. But nothing like this. The trees here were ancient, wider around than a house, their bark ridged and dark, and they grew so close together that the genin had to move in single file along paths that weren't really paths at all, just gaps where the undergrowth happened to be thinner. Sunlight came down in thin, sick-looking shafts, dust motes hanging in them like the air itself had gone still and hadn't moved in decades. They traveled for the better part of an hour without speaking much, Sasuke leading, Sakura in the middle, Naruto bringing up the rear and trying, genuinely trying, to move the way Kakashi had shown them, weight low, feet quiet, breath even. It didn't come naturally to him. Nothing about quiet came naturally to him, but he gritted his teeth and focused, because for once in his life he actually wanted Sasuke to be wrong about him. There, Sasuke said suddenly, dropping into a crouch on a wide branch 15 feet up. Sakura and Naruto followed, flattening themselves beside him. Below, through a gap in the leaves, a team of rain genin were crossing a shallow stream, their headbands glinting dull silver. 3 of them, moving carelessly, laughing about something. Heaven or earth? Sakura breathed. Sasuke's eyes narrowed, tracking the shape of a scroll case clipped to the belt of the tallest genin. Can't tell the color from here. I could go ask them, Naruto offered. No, I was joking. You weren't. Sakura held up a hand before either of them could start again, watching the rain team with the same calculating stillness Naruto had seen her wear over a chessboard. Back before any of this, back when the worst thing in her life was a math test. We follow them, she whispered. Wait for a choke point. Sasuke, you and Naruto flank from the trees. I'll draw them into the open. It was, annoyingly, a good plan. Naruto opened his mouth to say something about how he should be the one drawing them out, since he was loud anyway, might as well be useful, and then thought better of it, because Sakura's plan made more sense and he knew it, and for once he wanted to prove he could just listen. Fine, he said instead. Let's go. Sasuke actually glanced at him, something unreadable flickering across his face, surprise, maybe, that Naruto hadn't argued. He didn't say anything about it. He just nodded once and dropped soundlessly from the branch, vanishing into the undergrowth like smoke. The ambush went almost too smoothly. Sakura stumbled out into the shallow stream ahead of the rain team, clutching her ankle, wincing, playing the part of an injured, separated genin so well that Naruto, watching from the trees, chakra held tight and quiet the way Kakashi had drilled into them, almost forgot it was an act. Well, the tallest rain genin said, grinning as his team fanned out around her. Looks like somebody got left behind. Please, Sakura said, voice trembling in a way that made Naruto's stomach twist even though he knew it was fake. My team, they left me. I don't know where they went, I just need to get to the tower. Not a problem, the genin said, reaching for a kunai. But that earth scroll on your belt sure is gonna be our problem to take. That was the signal. Naruto dropped from the branch at the same instant Sasuke did, and the fight that followed lasted less than 90 seconds. Sasuke was a blur of motion, 3 shuriken already spinning from his fingers before his feet touched the ground, forcing 2 of the rain genin backward into a defensive stance. Naruto barreled into the third with a shoulder tackle that sent them both crashing into the shallows, and though the genin, a boy maybe a year older, wiry and quick, got in 2 solid hits before Naruto pinned his arm behind his back, it was Sakura who finished it, darting in from the side and pressing a kunai to his throat with a steadiness that made the boy go very, very still. Scrolls, she said. Now, it was over. The rain team, outnumbered and outpositioned, handed over their scroll case with the particular sullenness of genin who just learned a hard lesson about underestimating a helpless opponent, and fled into the trees without looking back. Naruto whooped, pumping a fist in the air. See? See, I told you. You told me you'd find the weakest team in the forest, Sasuke said, brushing leaves off his shoulder. This was luck. It was a good plan, Sakura corrected, opening the scroll case with careful fingers. Her face fell. It's an earth scroll. The whoop died in Naruto's throat. What? It's another earth scroll, Sakura said again, flatter this time, turning the scroll over as if a different angle might change what was written on it. We still don't have a heaven scroll. Sasuke exhaled through his nose, sharp and irritated, and looked away into the trees. We keep moving, he said. Waste of time. It wasn't a waste, Sakura said. Now we know that team's out of the running too. That's one less problem. It's not the scroll we needed. I know that, Sasuke. Naruto looked between them, the good feeling from the fight draining out of him fast, and said nothing at all, which for Naruto was its own kind of small miracle. They pressed on. By mid-afternoon the light had thinned even further, the canopy above thickening into something almost solid, and the sounds of the forest had changed too, less birdsong, more of that low, distant shifting, branches creaking under weights that never quite showed themselves. Twice they heard something large moving parallel to them through the underbrush, matching their pace exactly before falling away again, and each time Sasuke's hand drifted to the kunai pouch at his hip and stayed there a beat too long. They stopped to rest against the roots of an enormous tree, its bark deeply grooved, roots thick as Naruto's whole body arching up out of the ground and back down again like the ribs of something buried. Sakura passed around water and the last of the rice balls Naruto's landlady had insisted on packing for him, plain ones, no meat, wrapped carefully in paper because she knew he never remembered to eat on his own. Naruto ate his in 3 bites and immediately started eyeing Sasuke's. "Don't," Sasuke said without looking up. "I wasn't gonna, you were." They lapsed into a quiet that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't quite hostile either, the particular quiet of 3 people who'd been forced together by circumstance and were, slowly, despite everything, starting to figure out how to be a team. Naruto found himself watching Sasuke out of the corner of his eye, the tight set of his shoulders, the way his gaze kept flicking toward the trees even at rest. Like some part of him never fully stopped scanning for threats. He's scared, Naruto realized, with a small jolt. Not of the forest, exactly. Of something else. Something he wasn't saying. He didn't get the chance to think about it further, because that was when the wind changed. It wasn't dramatic. That was what made it worse. Looking back, no roar of chakra, no snapping branches, no warning at all. Just a shift in the air, a sudden thickness to it, like the pressure before a storm, and the birds that had still been faintly audible in the distance went silent all at once. Sasuke was on his feet before Naruto had even processed the change, kunai already in hand. "Something's here." Sakura scrambled up beside him, scroll pouch clutched tight against her chest. "Where? I don't see." "I don't know," Sasuke said, and Naruto had never heard him admit that so plainly before. No hedge, no attempt to sound like he had it under control. "I just know something's watching us." Naruto's own skin had gone tight and cold, goose flesh prickling up his arms despite the warm, wet heat of the forest air. He didn't have Sasuke's instincts, didn't have Sakura's sharp analytical eye for danger, but he had this old, animal certainty that had saved him more times than he could count back in the village, slipping through streets where people who hated him for reasons he'd never fully understood liked to lurk in alleys. The feeling of being hunted. "There," he said before he'd even consciously spotted anything, pointing toward a stand of trees off to their left where the shadows pooled a little too dark, a little too still. A woman stepped out of the shadows. She wore a Kusagakure headband and the standard gray of a grass genin, but nothing else about her matched the part, a strange, wrong quality to how she moved, too smooth, too economical, like a puppet operated by someone who'd studied human movement from a great distance and gotten almost everything right. Long black hair. Pale skin. A tongue that flicked out, just for a moment, far longer than any human tongue had a right to be, before vanishing back behind pale lips curved into a smile that didn't touch her eyes. My, she said, voice a low, amused purr. "Team 7. What an interesting little group you make. Who are you?" Sasuke demanded, stepping slightly in front of Sakura without seeming to notice he'd done it. "Just another genin, trying to survive the exam," the woman said, spreading her hands. "Same as you." Her eyes, golden, slitted, entirely wrong, moved over each of them in turn, lingering longest on Sasuke, an expression crossing her face that Naruto couldn't name but that made every hair on his body stand on end. "Though I confess I've been looking forward to meeting you 3 in particular." "That's not a genin's chakra," Sakura whispered, so quietly Naruto almost missed it. "Naruto, Sasuke, that's not..." She didn't get to finish the sentence. The world tilted. Later, Naruto would try to describe what happened next and fail, every time, because there wasn't really a way to describe it. One moment the woman was standing 30 feet away, smiling that wrong smile. The next, the air itself seemed to fold, a wave of killing intent crashing over the clearing so absolute, so total, that Naruto's knees buckled before he understood what was happening. Like every nightmare he'd ever had condensed into a single physical pressure, bearing down on his chest until he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stand there with his heart hammering and his vision swimming in some deep, ancient part of his brain screaming run, run, run even as his legs refused to obey. Beside him, he heard Sakura make a small, strangled sound and go down to one knee. Sasuke didn't fall. But Naruto, even through the haze of terror clouding his own mind, saw the way Sasuke's whole body had locked rigid, sweat beading along his hairline, pupils blown wide, the look of someone standing at the edge of something bottomless. There it is, the woman said softly, and when Naruto managed to drag his eyes back to her, she was gone from where she'd been standing. She was behind Sasuke. Sasuke! Naruto's voice tore out of him, raw, and he lunged. Too slow, always too slow, his body fighting through molasses-thick air, as the woman's hand closed around Sasuke's collar and pulled, dragging him bodily off his feet and slamming him into the trunk of the great tree hard enough that bark cracked and rained down in chunks. Sasuke gasped, pinned, kunai skittering from his numb fingers. Get away from him! Sakura was up now too, shaking but upright, kunai raised, and she threw it, a good throw, fast and true, and the woman caught it between two fingers without so much as glancing at it, without even letting go of Sasuke, and Naruto felt something in his chest go cold and hard with a fury he'd rarely felt in his life. Naruto, Sakura's voice, high and afraid. What do we do? He didn't have an answer. He just moved. He hit the woman with everything he had, a full-body tackle, shoulder first. Every ounce of momentum he could gather in the space between one heartbeat and the next, and for one dizzying second he thought it had worked, thought he'd actually knocked her loose, because she staggered back a full step and released Sasuke, who slumped against the tree roots, gasping. Then Naruto looked up into her face and understood, with the particular clarity that only comes right before something very bad happens, that she hadn't stumbled at all. She'd let him hit her. She was looking at him now, golden eyes narrowing with an interest that had nothing to do with Sasuke anymore, and her mouth curved into something that was almost, horribly, delight. Well, she murmured. You're interesting too, aren't you? What are you? Naruto started, and that was as far as he got, because her hand shot out and closed around his throat and lifted him clean off the ground. The world narrowed to the pressure of her fingers, to the golden slits of her eyes 6 inches from his own, to the coppery taste of adrenaline flooding his mouth. He clawed at her wrist with both hands, kicked, twisted, threw every scrap of chakra he had left into trying to break free, and none of it did anything at all. She held him there like he weighed nothing, tilting her head with an expression of clinical, terrible curiosity, as though she were reading something written on the inside of his skull. Such a strange thing you're carrying, she said, almost to herself. Layers upon layers. The fox, of course, anyone could feel that, it's practically screaming. But underneath, her grip tightened, and black spots bloomed at the edges of Naruto's vision. Underneath there's something else. Something old. Something that shouldn't still exist. Naruto couldn't answer. Couldn't breathe. His lungs burned, his vision tunneled, and somewhere very far away he heard Sakura screaming his name. I wonder, the woman said softly, and Naruto felt something press against the base of his neck, not a kunai, not a hand, something else, something that burned like a brand even through the haze of oxygen deprivation clawing at his mind. I wonder what would happen if I woke it up. Chakra flooded into him. It didn't feel like the seal breaking further, the way it sometimes did in his nightmares, the fox's presence pressing up against the edges of his mind like water against a dam. This was different. This was foreign. A second current threaded through the first, dark and searing, twisting through his chakra pathways like something trying to force a lock it didn't have the key for. Naruto's vision went white, then red, then nothing at all, his body convulsing in the woman's grip as pain lanced from the base of his skull down through every nerve he possessed. A burning that had nothing to do with fire and everything to do with something ancient and enormous trying to wake up all at once inside a body far too small to hold it. Distantly, so distantly it felt like it was happening to someone else, he heard Sasuke's voice, ragged, let him go, and then, abruptly, unexpectedly, mercifully, the pressure vanished. The woman released him, not gently, but not with any particular malice either, simply the careless drop of someone setting down something that had briefly held her attention, and now didn't. Naruto hit the ground hard, air rushing back into his starved lungs in a whooping gasp. And even as he lay there gagging and shaking, he was dimly aware of the woman turning back towards Sasuke with an entirely new focus, as though Naruto had simply stopped mattering. "You," she said, and something in her voice had shifted, hungrier now, more purposeful. "You are the one I came for." "Sasuke," Sakura's voice, breaking. Naruto's whole body screamed at him not to move. Every nerve was on fire, his vision kept doubling and blurring, and some deep animal part of his brain was still gibbering in pure terror from what had just happened. He didn't care. He forced himself up onto his hands and knees, spitting blood, and looked up in time to see the woman's neck extend, actually extend, stretching grotesquely across the space between them like something out of a nightmare, her head snapping forward, mouth opening far too wide, and sinking her teeth into the side of Sasuke's neck. Sasuke screamed. It was a sound Naruto had never heard him make before and never wanted to hear again, raw, involuntary, torn out of him by something beyond his control, and it seemed to go on, echoing off the ancient trees, as 3 tomo-shaped marks bloomed black and spreading across his skin like ink dropped in water. Then the woman released him, straightened, and smiled, a small, satisfied, terrible smile, as Sasuke slumped to the ground, unconscious, the strange marks already fading from black to a faint, angry red. "A gift," she said, "to no one in particular for later?" Her golden eyes swept back to Naruto, still on his hands and knees in the dirt, shaking, chakra roiling strangely inside him in a way he couldn't yet understand. "As for you," she said, almost thoughtfully, "we'll see what grows. Some seeds take root. Some don't. I find I'm curious either way." And then, impossibly, infuriatingly, she was simply gone, melting into the shadows of the trees as though she had never been there at all, leaving behind only the ringing silence of the forest and the sound of Sakura's ragged, frightened breathing. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Sakura was scrambling across the clearing to Sasuke's side, hands hovering over him, afraid to touch, afraid not to. "Sasuke, Sasuke, can you hear me?" He wasn't dead. Naruto could see that much, could see the shallow rise and fall of his chest, the sweat-slicked pallor of his face, the way his brow was furrowed even unconscious as though he were still fighting something. But he wasn't waking up either, and the marks on his neck, 3 small black commas, arranged in a curling pattern, seemed, if anything, to be spreading, faint dark lines creeping outward beneath his skin like roots. "Naruto." Sakura's voice cracked. "Naruto, help me, we have to. I don't know what to do, I don't know what that was." He tried to answer her. He really did, but his body wasn't listening to him anymore. It started as a low throb behind his eyes, easy enough to mistake for a lingering echo of being choked half unconscious, but it built, fast, spreading outward from the base of his skull in waves that made him gasp and clutch at his head, curling forward over his knees. Something was moving inside him, not the fox. He knew what the fox's chakra felt like, that hot, roiling, malevolent pressure he'd felt flare up once or twice in moments of real danger, red and heavy and angry. This was different. This felt old in a way that had nothing to do with anger. It felt like waking up. "Do you wish to survive?" The voice didn't come from outside him. It didn't come from inside him either, not exactly. It came from somewhere in between, from a place Naruto had never known existed inside his own body. Ancient and vast and utterly calm in a way that made his skin crawl. What? He gasped out loud, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to Sakura or to the voice or to no one at all. Images, not words this time, flooding through him too fast to fully grasp, the way dreams sometimes did, vivid and fragmentary and gone before he could hold onto them. Scales dark as riverstone, catching light he didn't recognize. A sky he'd never seen, vast and violet-orange, wheeling past beneath something enormous and airborne. The sensation, impossible, dizzying, of wings. Not metaphorical wings, real ones, vast membranes stretched taut between bone, catching wind, and beneath them a world laid out small and distant and utterly, thrillingly conquerable. A heartbeat that was not his own, slow and enormous, thudding somewhere deep beneath his own quick, frightened pulse. A second heartbeat, patient, ancient, waiting. "Blood remembers even when the mind forgets," the voice said, and it was not unkind, exactly, but it was not gentle either. It was simply, overwhelmingly old, the way a mountain is old, indifferent to the small, frantic scale of human fear. You were dying. A moment longer and there would have been nothing left to wake. So, do you wish to survive, Naruto? Sakura's voice, very far away now, edged with real panic. Naruto, something's wrong, your chakra is, Naruto, look at me, he wanted to answer her. He wanted, more than almost anything else in that moment, to simply be a 12-year-old boy on his hands and knees in a forest, terrified and confused and needing someone to tell him it was going to be okay. But the voice was still there, patient, waiting, and some part of him, the part that had spent his whole life clawing his way up out of holes other people kept trying to bury him in, the part that had decided, alone, at 5 years old, that he was going to become Hokage no matter how many people told him it was impossible. That part of him answered before he'd even consciously decided to. Yes, he thought, or said, or both. Yes, whatever it takes, yes. The pain that followed was unlike anything Naruto had ever experienced. It wasn't the sharp, clean pain of a wound. It was deeper than that, more fundamental. The pain of something being remade from the inside out. Chakra pathways that had existed one way for 12 years suddenly forced to accommodate something they were never built to hold. Like trying to pour a river through a canal made for a stream. He heard himself screaming, distantly, as though the sound belonged to someone else, and felt his back arch, felt his fingers dig furrows into the dirt, felt heat pour through him in waves that started at the base of his skull and rolled outward, down his spine, along his arms, across his cheekbones, heat that didn't burn exactly but felt like it should, like his skin was too small to contain whatever was moving beneath it. Easy, the voice said. And for the first time there was something almost like warmth in it, or perhaps only the vast, patient amusement of something ancient watching something very young struggle. This is not the fox's fire. This is older. Slower. It will not consume you the way the fox's chakra might, if given the chance, but it will change you, and there is no undoing that once it is begun. Breathe. Do not fight it. Fighting is how the fools of your bloodline died, generations ago. Trying to hold back a tide with their bare hands. My bloodline? Naruto managed, or thought, the distinction blurring. What bloodline? I'm nobody's. You are exactly somebody's, the voice said, you simply were never told whose. That is a conversation for later, small one. For now, breathe. Let it in. Stop fighting the tide. Naruto didn't know how to do that. His entire life had been built around fighting. Fighting for scraps of attention, fighting for a single moment where people looked at him without the shadow of the fox behind their eyes, fighting to be seen as something other than what the village had decided he was before he was even old enough to understand why. Fighting was the only language he really knew, but something in the voice's tone, that ancient, unhurried patience, made him try anyway. He stopped clawing at the dirt. He stopped trying to force his lungs to work faster than they could. He let his eyes fall shut, and instead of fighting the heat spreading through him, he did something he had almost never done in his entire short, chaotic life. He held still, and let it happen. The change, when it came all at once. Sakura would tell the story later, much later, when the fear had faded enough to be turned into words, and she would never quite manage to make it sound the way it had actually felt to watch. She'd say Naruto's whole body went rigid, and then, impossibly, relaxed, his frantic thrashing stilling into something that looked less like a seizure and more like. She struggled with this part every time, like something settling into place. She'd say there was a light, faint and gold, tracing patterns beneath his skin along the lines of his arms and up his throat, gone as quickly as it appeared. She'd say the temperature in the clearing seemed to rise, just for a moment, the humid forest air turning briefly, inexplicably dry and hot, like standing too close to a bonfire. What she wouldn't be able to explain, not to Kakashi, not to the Hokage, not even really to herself, was the sound. It came from Naruto, from somewhere deep in his chest, a sound too low and resonant to have come from a human throat, rolling out across the clearing and rattling the leaves on branches 30 feet up. Not a roar, not exactly. Something quieter and somehow more unsettling than that, a deep, sustained rumble, felt in the chest as much as heard, the kind of sound Sakura imagined the earth itself might make if it could groan. Then it stopped, and Naruto went still, and for one long, terrible moment Sakura was certain he was dead. Naruto? Her voice came out as barely a whisper, kneeling now between the two boys, one hand still hovering uselessly over Sasuke's unconscious form, the other reaching, shaking, toward Naruto's shoulder. Naruto, please. His eyes opened. Sakura's breath caught in her throat. They weren't blue anymore, or not entirely. The blue was still there, ringing the outer edge of his irises, but the pupils had gone strange, narrowing into thin vertical slits like a cat's, or some distant part of her brain supplied unhelpfully, like a snake's, and around the slits the color had shifted, deepening from bright cerulean into something richer and darker, molten gold bleeding in at the edges, catching the dim forest light and throwing it back with an unnatural, faintly luminous quality that made her skin prickle just to look at it. Naruto, she said again, very carefully, is that you in there? For a long, agonizing second, he didn't answer. His new eyes, gold-ringed, slitted alien, moved slowly around the clearing, taking in the shadowed trees, the ruined bark where Sasuke had been slammed into the trunk, Sakura's frightened face hovering above him, with an expression she couldn't read at all, something that looked less like confusion and more like recognition, somehow, as though he were seeing the forest for the first time in a way that made a strange kind of sense to him. Then he blinked, and something in his face crumpled back into the boy she knew, panic flooding into those strange new eyes. Sakura? His voice came out hoarse, raw from screaming, but it was his voice. That was the important thing, that registered somewhere in her chest as relief so sharp it was almost painful. Sakura, what happened? What's wrong with why does everything look? He lifted a hand in front of his face, and Sakura watched him go rigid with shock as he saw it properly for the first time, the faint, fading traceries of patterns still visible along the backs of his fingers, like the ghost of scales sketched in something darker than skin, already fading but not gone, not entirely, a shadow of dark, iridescent markings creeping up from his wrist and disappearing beneath his sleeve. What? His breathing had gone fast and shallow, panic rising in his voice with every word. What is that? What's happening to me, Sakura? What is that? I don't know. Her own voice cracked, fear and helplessness tangling together. I don't know, Naruto, that woman, she did something to you, and to Sasuke, and I don't know what any of this is. Naruto scrambled backward, away from her, away from his own hands, breathing coming in short, panicked gasps, and for one terrible moment Sakura thought he might actually bolt, might vanish into the trees in sheer animal terror of what was happening to his own body. And then his gaze fell on Sasuke, unconscious, pale, marks still faintly visible at the curve of his neck, and something in Naruto's face changed. The fear didn't vanish, but something steadier settled over it, underneath it, holding it in place the way a hand steadies a shaking cup. Is he going to be okay? Naruto asked, and his voice, though still rough, had stopped shaking quite so badly. I don't know, Sakura admitted. He's breathing. He won't wake up. Naruto crawled back toward them both, slower now, more careful, as though moving too fast might shatter whatever fragile control he managed to grab hold of. He looked down at Sasuke's still face, and then, hesitantly, at his own hands again, flexing his fingers, watching the last traces of the dark pattern fade fully from his skin, leaving nothing behind but pale, ordinary flesh, except for his eyes, which Sakura could see reflected faintly in a puddle of standing water nearby, still gold-ringed, still slitted, staring back at him with an expression of dawning, horrified confusion. Sakura, he said, very quietly, in a voice that sounded, for a moment, exactly as young and frightened as he actually was. What's wrong with me? She didn't have an answer. She wished, more than almost anything in that moment, that she did. We need to get somewhere safe, she said instead, because that, at least, was a problem she knew how to solve, or try to. We need to get Sasuke somewhere we can actually rest, and figure out, whatever this is. She gestured vaguely at Naruto's eyes, unable to find better words for it. Can you carry him? I don't think I can, not far, and she hesitated, glancing again at the fading marks on his hands. You seem stronger than before. Does that make sense? Are you even still? I'm still me, Naruto said, sharply enough that Sakura flinched, and then he seemed to hear how it had sounded and softened, just slightly. I'm still me, Sakura. I promise. I don't know what happened. There was a voice, and he stopped himself, shook his head hard, like he was trying to physically dislodge the memory. It doesn't matter right now. You're right. We need to move. I've got him. He lifted Sasuke with an ease that made Sakura's breath catch again, not the strained, determined effort of a 12-year-old carrying another 12-year-old's dead weight, but something closer to effortless. Sasuke's limp form settled easily across his back as Naruto rose to his feet, and for just a moment, in the dim green light of the ancient forest, Sakura thought she saw something flicker at the edges of his shadow on the ground, something with too many points, too sharp an outline, gone again before she could be sure she'd seen anything at all. Which way? Naruto asked, and his voice, at least, sounded steady now, sounded like the boy she'd spent the last several weeks learning to trust, however reluctantly, however slowly. Sakura swallowed hard, pushed her own fear down into some small, locked corner of her mind to be dealt with later, and pointed east, toward higher ground, toward the vague shape of rocky outcroppings she remembered from the map they'd been shown before the exam began. That way, she said. There were caves marked, I think. Somewhere we can hide, at least for a little while. They moved. They found the cave an hour later, a shallow overhang more than a true cave, tucked into a rocky rise where the trees thinned enough to let real daylight through for the first time since they'd entered the forest, the sky above a narrow strip of washed-out gray-blue between the canopy. It wasn't much of a shelter. But it had a defensible entrance, a rock wall at their backs, and enough space for the three of them to huddle together while the adrenaline slowly, agonizingly drained out of all their limbs and left them shaking in its wake. Naruto set Sasuke down as gently as he could manage, propping him against the rock wall, and then sank down himself a few feet away, wrapping his arms around his knees and staring fixedly at nothing. Sakura busied herself checking Sasuke's pulse, his temperature, the marks on his neck, still faintly visible, 3 curling black commas that seemed, mercifully, to have stopped spreading, with the careful, methodical focus of someone trying very hard not to think about anything else. It helped a little. It gave her hands something to do. His pulse is steady, she said eventually, more to fill the silence than because she thought Naruto particularly needed the update. Fast but steady. I think he's just unconscious. Not worse than that. Good, Naruto said, though his voice was distant, distracted. That's good. Sakura glanced over at him. In the better light of the overhang, she could see his eyes clearly now, and they hadn't changed back, still gold-ringed, still slitted, an unsettling, beautiful, wrong sort of color that didn't belong in a human face. He was staring down at his own hands again, turning them over slowly, watching the play of the dim light across his skin as though searching for something he couldn't quite find. Naruto, she said carefully. What did you mean before? About a voice? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low, uncertain, entirely unlike the loud, brash confidence she'd come to expect from him. There was a voice, he said. In my head. Not the fox. I know what the fox feels like, kind of, sometimes, when I get really scared or really angry. It's like this heat, right here. He pressed a fist briefly against his stomach. And it's angry, all the time, just simmering there. This wasn't that. This felt. He trailed off, searching for the word. Old, he said finally. Really, really old. And it asked me something. Asked you what? If I wanted to survive. His hands had gone still in his lap. And I said yes. And then everything hurt like my whole body was being rebuilt from the inside. And then it stopped. And now he gestured helplessly at himself, at his own face, his own eyes that he couldn't see but could feel, somehow, the strangeness of them, the way the world looked slightly different now, colors sharper, shadows deeper, a faint heat shimmer visible around Sakura and Sasuke, both that he was fairly sure hadn't been there before, that he was fairly sure most people couldn't see. I don't know what I am right now, Sakura. I don't know what that woman did to me. Sakura was quiet for a long moment, chewing her lip, and Naruto braced himself, for fear, maybe, or disgust, the kind of look people back in the village sometimes gave him without ever quite explaining why, a look that made him feel like something other than a person. Instead, she scooted a little closer, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and said, very quietly, You're still you. Your voice is the same. The way you talk is the same. Whatever's happening on the outside, that doesn't change who you are. You know that, right? Naruto blinked, hard, fast, several times, and looked away, suddenly and fiercely focused on a spot of moss on the cave wall. Yeah, he said, voice thick. Yeah, I know. He didn't, not really. Not yet. But it helped to hear her say it anyway. They sat in silence for a while after that, the three of them, two conscious, one not, tucked into the shallow stone overhang while the forest breathed and shifted around them, indifferent to the small, strange, frightened knot of humanity sheltering within it. Somewhere in the deep canopy, that same slow, patient shifting sound continued, whatever vast unseen thing made it never quite drawing close enough to be a direct threat, never quite far enough away to be forgotten. Naruto found his gaze drawn, again and again, back to his own hands, to the memory of scales and wings and a violet sky he'd never seen with his own two human eyes and yet somehow remembered, the way you remember a dream that felt more real than your waking life. The voice's words kept circling back through his mind, refusing to settle. You are exactly somebody's. You simply were never told whose. He thought of the orphanage, the empty apartment he'd grown up in alone, the wall of blank space where other kids had family photos and he'd had nothing, not even a name to attach to the shape of parents, not even a story, just an absence so total it had eventually stopped hurting in any specific way and just become part of the general, low-grade ache of his whole childhood. My bloodline, he thought. I have a bloodline. I'm somebody's. It should have felt like an answer. Instead it just opened up 100 new questions, each one sharper and more urgent than the last, and he had no way to ask any of them, not here, not now, not with Sasuke unconscious and marked with something dark and dangerous, not with a strange enemy still somewhere out there in the trees, not with a scroll they still needed and 4 more days of forest still ahead of them, and a whole exam still to survive. Later, he told himself, the way he told himself so many things over the years, filing away pain and confusion into some back room of his mind to be dealt with when there was actually room to deal with it. I'll figure it out later. Right now I just need to keep them safe. He looked over at Sasuke's still, pale face, at the faint dark marks curling against his neck, and felt something settle in his chest, not the fox's familiar hot anger, and not quite the strange, vast calm of the voice either, but something that felt entirely, stubbornly his own. I'm not gonna let anything else happen to either of you. I don't care what I am now. I don't care what that woman did to me. I'm still Naruto Uzumaki, and I'm still going to protect my team, and I'm still going to become Hokage someday, no matter how weird my eyes look right now. He didn't say any of it out loud. Sakura was watching him, though, in the dim light of the overhang, and something in his face must have shown, because she reached over, hesitant, but steady, and put a hand on his shoulder. We're gonna be okay, she said, and her voice, though still shaky, carried a thread of real determination underneath the fear. We're gonna figure this out. All of us. Together. Naruto nodded, throat too tight to answer properly. Outside the overhang, the forest's strange breathing continued, patient and vast and indifferent, and somewhere far above the canopy the sun continued its slow crawl toward evening. And somewhere out there in the deep green dark, a pale woman with golden, slitted eyes smiled to herself and thought about seeds, and roots, and what, exactly, might grow. And in Naruto's chest, beneath the frightened, familiar rhythm of his own racing heart, something else had begun to beat, slow and steady, and utterly unlike anything that had ever beaten there before. A second heartbeat. Waiting. Sasuke woke just before dusk, and the first thing he did was reach for a kunai that wasn't there. His hand closed on empty air, fingers curling instinctively into the shape of a weapon, and it took a full 3 seconds of blinking confusion before his eyes focused on the low stone ceiling above him, on the dim, orange light bleeding in through the mouth of the overhang, on Sakura's face hovering close, pale with worry. Don't move too fast, she said, before he could try to sit up. You've been out for hours. What happened? It wasn't a question, not really. His voice was flat, controlled, but his free hand had already drifted to the side of his neck, to the place where 3 faint marks curled beneath his collar like something drawn in charcoal and left to smudge. His fingers pressed against them, and Sakura watched his jaw tighten at whatever he felt there. That woman. Where is she? Gone, Sakura said. She left after. She hesitated, glancing sideways, toward the mouth of the overhang, where Naruto sat with his back to them both, shoulders hunched, staring out at the darkening forest. After she did whatever she did to you. And to Naruto. That got Sasuke's attention properly. He pushed himself upright, too fast, judging by the way he swayed, and had to brace a hand against the rock wall, and looked past Sakura to where Naruto sat, unmoving, silhouetted against the last orange light of the day. What's wrong with him? Naruto's shoulders stiffened. He didn't turn around. I'm right here, he said, voice rougher than usual. You can ask me? Sasuke's dark eyes narrowed, studying the back of Naruto's head with the particular intensity he usually reserved for opponents. Fine. What's wrong with you? Naruto turned around then, and even in the fading light, even with the strangeness gentled somewhat by shadow, Sakura watched Sasuke's expression shift, surprise first, quickly and deliberately smoothed away, the way Sasuke smoothed away almost everything he felt before anyone got a good look at it. Naruto's eyes hadn't changed back. If anything, in the dimness, the gold ring around each slitted pupil seemed to catch what little light there was and throw it back, faint and eerie, like a cat's eyes reflecting a lamp. That's new, Sasuke said, carefully neutral. No kidding, Naruto muttered. Is it the fox? The question landed harder than Sasuke probably meant it to. Sakura saw Naruto flinch, just slightly, a small tightening around his newly strange eyes that she was coming to recognize as the specific expression he wore whenever anyone brought up the thing he never talked about, the thing half the adults in the village looked at him like he was, instead of like he simply carried. No, Naruto said, and there was an edge in his voice now, sharper than Sakura had expected. It's not the fox. I know what the fox feels like. This is something else. Something else, Sasuke repeated, flat, skeptical. Yeah. Something else. Naruto's hands had curled into fists at his sides. You think I wanted this? You think I asked for my eyes to go all? He gestured vaguely at his own face, frustration bleeding into the movement. Whatever this is? That woman did something to me. Same as she did something to you. Except you got knocked out for it, and I got a front row seat. Sasuke's hand drifted back to his neck, to the marks there, and something flickered across his face. Not quite guilt, not quite fear. Something more complicated that he clearly had no intention of naming out loud. What did she do to you? He said instead, and it wasn't really a question so much as a demand. Naruto was quiet for a moment. Then, haltingly, in fits and starts that Sakura suspected cost him more than he'd ever admit, he told it. The choking grip around his throat, the burning pressure at the base of his skull, the voice that wasn't the fox's voice, the images of scales and wings and a violet sky, the pain of something ancient forcing its way awake inside a body that had never held it before. When he finished, the overhang was very quiet. Somewhere out in the darkening trees, something large shifted its weight against the undergrowth, and none of the three of them so much as glanced toward the sound, too caught up in the far stranger, far more immediate problem sitting 3 feet away with slitted golden eyes. A voice, Sasuke said finally. Talking to you? In your head. I know how it sounds. I didn't say it sounded like anything. Sasuke's expression had gone carefully blank in the way it did when he was thinking hard and didn't want anyone to see the shape of the thoughts. The Ninetales talks to you? Not like a conversation. It's more like... Naruto struggled for the words, frustration creasing his brow. It's like being really, really angry, except the anger isn't fully yours. Like standing next to a furnace. You can feel the heat even if you're not the one burning. He shook his head. This wasn't like that. This felt like, I don't know. Like something old and patient. Like talking to a mountain. Blood remembers even when the mind forgets, Sakura murmured, half to herself, repeating back the fragment Naruto had told them earlier, turning it over like a puzzle piece that didn't yet fit anywhere. That's what it said. That you're somebody's. That you have a bloodline. Yeah. Naruto's voice had gone quiet again, some of the earlier heat draining out of it, replaced by something more uncertain. I don't know what that means. There's never been anything. No family, no clan. Nothing. Just me. Sasuke was watching him with an expression Sakura had genuinely never seen on his face before. Not quite sympathy. Sasuke didn't really do sympathy, not openly, but something adjacent to it, something that looked almost like recognition. He knew what it was to carry something you hadn't asked for. He knew what it was to have your body marked by someone else's design and be left to sort out what it meant afterward, alone, in the dark, with no one to explain it to you properly. "We'll figure it out," Sasuke said gruffly, in the tone of someone changing the subject because the alternative was sitting in a feeling for longer than he could stand. "Later. When we're not sitting in a hole in the ground in the middle of a forest that wants to eat us." "Right." Naruto managed something that was almost a smile, small and tired. Priorities. They rested through the worst of the night, taking turns on watch, Sakura first, then Sasuke, though he insisted on taking a longer shift than agreed on the grounds that he'd already slept most of the day away, an argument Naruto was too exhausted to properly fight him on. When it was finally Naruto's turn, near the deepest, darkest hour before dawn, he found that he didn't actually need to fight to stay awake the way he normally would have. His body didn't feel tired the way it usually did after a hard day. There was an ache, low and deep, settled into muscles that had done more than their share of work, carrying Sasuke's dead weight for over an hour, throwing himself bodily at a woman who could apparently catch thrown kunai without looking, but underneath the ache was something else, a strange, steady well of energy that hadn't been there before, humming quietly at the edges of his senses like a held breath. He sat at the mouth of the overhang, knees drawn up, and watched the forest. Really watched it, for the first time, because somewhere in the hours since the woman's attack, his eyes had settled into whatever they'd become, and looking out into the near-total darkness of the forest at night, Naruto realized with a jolt that he could see. Not perfectly. It wasn't daylight. Everything still carried the deep blue-black cast of true night, but shapes resolved out of the gloom that should have been invisible. The twist of roots 40 feet away, the outline of a bird roosting high in the canopy, the faint, cooler shimmer of a small stream trickling somewhere off to the east that he couldn't have heard, not from this distance, and yet somehow he could feel the wrongness of its temperature against the warmer forest floor, a kind of pressure sense he didn't have words for. He lifted a hand in front of his face and flexed his fingers, watching the faint gleam of moonlight, what little of it made it down through the canopy, catch strangely against his skin, and found himself thinking, unbidden, of the voice's words. Blood remembers even when the mind forgets. He didn't know what to do with that. He'd spent his whole life being told, in 100 small and large ways, that he had nothing, no parents, no clan, no history, nothing but the fox sealed inside him and the fear and resentment that came along with it. To suddenly be told he was somebody's, that there was a whole thread of history running back through his blood that he'd simply never been told about. It should have felt like a gift. Instead, it mostly just felt like one more thing that had been kept from him, one more door that had been locked and hidden his entire life, while everyone around him apparently already knew where the key was. Not everyone, he corrected himself, glancing back into the overhang at Sakura's sleeping shape, curled tight against the cold, and Sasuke's stiller form beside her, one hand still resting near the marks on his neck even in sleep, as though guarding them. They didn't know either. Nobody in the village told them anything about this. Just me. It didn't make him feel better, exactly. But it made the loneliness of it feel slightly less total, and right now, in the dark, exhausted and strange in his own skin, he'd take what he could get. Far to the west, in the Hokage's tower overlooking the village, an old man sat before a wide crystal ball, watching. Hiruzen Sarutobi had performed this particular ritual every year the Chunin Exams were held in Konoha, a quiet, private habit that predated most of the current Jonin's careers, checking on the Genin teams during the second stage, not to interfere, never to interfere, but simply to know, to watch, and to worry, the way any old man watches children he has come, over the decades, to think of as something like his own. He had been watching Team 7 in particular this year with more attention than most. Kakashi's team always warranted it. The boy carrying the fox demanded a certain vigilance no matter how settled things seemed on the surface. But tonight, something in the crystal ball's shifting images had made the old Hokage sit forward in his chair, pipe forgotten, smoke curling unattended toward the ceiling. He had felt it before he properly saw it, a flicker of chakra, sharp and unfamiliar, cutting through the image like static across a radio signal. Not the fox's chakra. He knew that signature intimately, had felt its edges pressing against the seal more times than he cared to count over the years. Always the same, hot, heavy, malevolent, ancient in the specific way of something old, and furious, and caged. This was different. Older somehow, in a way that had nothing to do with anger. It moved through the boy's chakra network like something settling in rather than clawing to get out. By the time the image in the crystal ball had cleared enough to show him anything useful, the worst of it seemed to have already passed. Naruto slumped in the dirt, Sakura kneeling over him, Sasuke unconscious nearby with 3 small dark marks visible at his throat that made the old Hokage's stomach drop with immediate, dreadful recognition. A curse seal, he thought grimly. Orochimaru. There was no other explanation for marks like that, and no other person in the world with both the skill and the motive to plant one on a Konoha Genin during the Chunin Exams. But it was the other thing, the strange chakra flickering around Naruto, that held the old man's full attention. Long after the immediate danger seemed to have passed and the 3 genin had begun making their slow, careful way toward whatever shelter they could find, he set his pipe down entirely and leaned forward, studying the image with the sharp, focused attention of a man who had spent 70 years learning to read the small details that mattered. What was that, he thought? That was not the Ninetales chakra. I know that signature too well to mistake it for anything else, even at its faintest. This was something else entirely. A memory stirred, distant and half-formed, something from decades past, buried under the weight of everything that had happened since, a rumor more than a fact, whispered among the older shinobi of his own generation back when he himself had still been young. Something about the Uzumaki clan, about the strange breadth of their bloodlines, about old alliances and older blood that had, at various points in their scattered history, mingled with things that weren't entirely, purely human. Surely not, he thought, and then, more honestly, or perhaps. I genuinely don't know. There is so much about that boy's heritage I was never permitted to properly investigate, for his own safety as much as anything else. He sat back slowly, the crystal ball's image finally settling on the 3 genin making camp in a shallow rock overhang, and reached, almost absently, for the small intercom on his desk. Get me a message to Jiraiya, he said, when the attendant on the other end answered. Tell him it's urgent. Tell him it concerns the boy. There was a pause on the other end. Which boy, Lord Hokage? The old man's gaze remained fixed on the crystal ball, on the small, strange figure sitting alone at the mouth of the overhang, keeping watch over his sleeping teammates with eyes that, even at this distance, even through the imperfect medium of the crystal ball's vision, seemed to catch and hold the faint moonlight in a way that no ordinary human eyes should. Naruto, he said quietly. Tell him it concerns Naruto. Morning came thin and gray, filtered green through the canopy, and with it came the reluctant, aching business of getting moving again. We need a heaven scroll, Sakura said, chewing on a strip of dried fish as they packed up what little gear they'd spread out during the night. Practical, plain fare, nothing fancy. The kind of provisions any sensible genin team carried into a 5-day survival exam. And we've burned almost a full day just resting. If we're not careful we'll run out of time before we even find another team to take one from. I can move faster now, Naruto offered, flexing his hands experimentally. The strangeness in his eyes hadn't faded overnight. If anything, in the clearer light of morning, it seemed more pronounced, the gold ring around each slitted pupil catching the pale green forest light with an unsettling, faintly luminous quality that made Sakura's stomach twist a little every time she looked at him directly. I don't know how to explain it. Stronger. Like I could run for hours and not get tired. We noticed, Sasuke said dryly, adjusting the collar of his shirt to better hide the marks at his neck, a habit he'd apparently already settled into without needing to discuss it, the same quiet, controlled denial he brought to most things that frightened him. You carried me for an hour without slowing down. That's not normal, even for someone with the fox. I told you it's not, I know. Not the fox. I heard you the first time. Sasuke shouldered his pack, movements still slightly stiff from whatever the curse mark had done to his body overnight, though he was doing an admirable job of hiding just how much it still bothered him. It doesn't matter what it is right now. What matters is we use it. If you're stronger, use it. We need a heaven scroll, and we need to get to that tower before something worse than that woman finds us. Naruto blinked at him, caught slightly off guard by the pragmatism of it. No lingering fear, no distrust, just Sasuke doing what Sasuke always did, assessing an asset and deciding how best to deploy it, as though Naruto's transformation were simply one more tool in the team's arsenal rather than the terrifying, disorienting thing it actually felt like from the inside. It shouldn't have felt like a relief. It did anyway. Right, Naruto said, and something in his chest loosened, just slightly, some knot of fear he hadn't fully realized he'd been carrying since the night before. Yeah. Okay. Let's go find a scroll. They moved faster that morning than they had the day before, Naruto setting a pace at the front now, weaving through the ancient trees with a fluid, low-slung economy of motion that surprised even him, every leap between branches landing exactly where he intended it to, every shift in direction anticipated a half-second before he consciously decided to make it, as though some part of his body had simply started making better decisions than his mind was fully aware of. It wasn't that he'd become a different person overnight. His plans were still mostly terrible, his instincts still leaned toward charging straight at problems rather than around them, and Sasuke still had to grab his collar twice before noon to stop him from barreling directly into what turned out to be, on closer inspection, an obvious trap, a suspiciously undisturbed clearing with the scroll case sitting in plain view at its center, the kind of bait that any genin with 2 brain cells to rub together should have recognized immediately. It's not that obvious, Naruto protested, after Sasuke yanked him bodily back into the tree line moments before a spring-loaded net of ninja wire would have taken his legs off at the knee. It's exactly that obvious, Sasuke said. You're strong now. You're not smart. Those aren't the same thing. Hey, he's not wrong, Sakura added unhelpfully, from a few branches back. Naruto grumbled something uncharitable under his breath, but he didn't actually disagree, because, annoyingly, Sasuke had a point. Whatever the woman's chakra had done to him, it hadn't rewired his brain into something more careful or more patient. If anything, the surge of new confidence in his own body made him more inclined to charge headfirst at things, not less, and it took a real, deliberate effort to remember that being stronger didn't automatically mean being smarter about how he used that strength. Old and patient, he thought, remembering the voice's cadence, the vast unhurried calm underneath its words. I could stand to learn a thing or two from whatever that thing is. They found their opening a few hours later, in the early afternoon, when the telltale signs of another team's passage, snapped branches, a half-buried footprint in soft earth, the lingering trace of recently disturbed chakra, led them to the edge of a shallow ravine where 3 genin from a team Naruto didn't recognize, wearing headbands from a village he couldn't place, were arguing in low, urgent voices over what looked like a torn map. That's them, Sakura whispered, crouched low beside Naruto in the undergrowth, watching through a gap in the leaves. I don't know the headband. Not one of the villages that usually sends teams to Konoha's exam. Doesn't matter, Sasuke said, from Naruto's other side, eyes narrowed in careful appraisal. What matters is which scroll they're carrying. As if summoned by the question, one of the 3 genin below, a broad-shouldered boy with a bandaged forearm, pulled a scroll case free from his belt to check it, and even from this distance, even through the dappled forest light, Naruto could make out the pale, unmistakable color of the paper wrapping. Heaven scroll. There, Naruto breathed, feeling something tighten with excitement in his chest. That's it. That's what we need. 3 of them, Sasuke murmured, doing the same swift tactical calculation he always did before a fight. They looked tired, probably been running from someone else already, judging by that map. If we're fast, we take them before they can regroup. I'll go first, Naruto said, already shifting his weight forward, that strange new energy humming under his skin like a held breath finally being released. Naruto. Sakura's warning came half a second too late. He was already moving. It wasn't a plan, not really, not the careful, coordinated ambush they'd used the day before against the Rain team. It was closer to instinct, some ancient, coiled spring readiness in his new body simply acting before his conscious mind had fully caught up, and Naruto crossed the distance between the tree line and the ravine floor in a single leap that should, by any normal measure, have been impossible, landing directly in the middle of the startled genin trio with enough force to crack the dry earth beneath his feet. Hey! The broad-shouldered boy stumbled back, scroll case clutched instinctively to his chest. Where did? Naruto didn't give him time to finish the thought. He moved, faster than he'd ever moved in his life, faster than he'd even known his body was capable of, and had the scroll case wrenched from the boy's grip before any of the 3 genin had fully processed what was happening. using the boy's own startled stumble as leverage to spin past him and put himself squarely between the enemy team and the tree line where his teammates waited. "Give that back!" one of the other genin shouted, a girl with her hair tied back in a tight braid, already reaching for a kunai. "Sorry," Naruto said, and grinned, a real grin, wide and reckless, the kind of grin he wore right before doing something he probably shouldn't. "Kinda need this one." The girl threw her kunai. It should have hit him, a clean, well-aimed throw, the kind of attack that would have caught Naruto square in the shoulder just a day earlier, back before any of this had happened to him. Instead, Naruto's hand snapped up and caught it out of the air, fingers closing around the hilt with an ease that surprised even him, the motion so fast and so instinctive that he registered what he'd done almost a full second after he'd already done it. The clearing went very quiet. "That's..." The broad-shouldered boy's voice had gone thin with something that was equal parts fear and disbelief. That's not normal." "Yeah, well..." Naruto tossed the caught kunai casually to the ground between them, the metal ringing against the stone with a sound too loud in the sudden silence. "Lot of things about me aren't normal right now. You should probably just let this go." For a moment, he genuinely thought they might. The three genin exchanged a fast, uncertain glance, weighing the value of a heaven scroll against whatever unsettling display they just witnessed, and Naruto could see the calculation happening behind their eyes, the same calculation any sensible shinobi would run. Is this fight worth it? Then the third genin, a wiry boy who'd been silent until now, made a fast series of hand signs, and the ground beneath Naruto's feet cracked open into a shallow earthen pit lined with hardened spikes, a decent trap, well executed. The kind of jutsu that would have caught most genin flat-footed and ended the fight in a single move. Naruto felt the ground give way beneath him, and in the split second before he would have fallen, something in his body simply reacted. Not thought, not decision, just pure animal instinct threaded through with something older and stranger than his own 12 years of experience, and he found himself twisting mid-fall, planting one foot against the crumbling lip of the pit and pushing, launching himself backward and up in an arc that carried him clear over the trap entirely, landing in a low crouch a good 10 feet behind where he'd started. The wiry boy's face went pale. "That's not possible. Nobody dodges that trap. It's..." "Guess I'm nobody, then," Naruto said, and this time there was an edge underneath the grin, something sharper and less playful, some deep, old part of him that had spent his whole life being called nobody in one form or another finally getting to turn the word into a weapon instead of a wound. The fight that followed lasted less than a minute. Naruto moved through the remaining two genin, the girl with the braid and the wiry boy, with a speed and precision that felt, from the inside, less like fighting and more like some deep, patient part of him simply guiding his limbs through motions his conscious mind was only half aware of choosing. He ducked under a wild swing from the girl's kunai, caught her wrist, and used her own momentum to spin her into the wiry boy just as he finished another set of hand signs, disrupting the jutsu before it could fully form. When the broad-shouldered boy finally recovered his nerve enough to charge, Naruto simply stepped into the punch rather than away from it, let it connect solidly against his forearm, and felt, with a strange, distant sort of surprise, that it barely hurt at all, the impact absorbed by something harder and more resilient than ordinary skin and muscle had any right to be. He didn't hurt any of them badly. Some part of him, even in the heat of the fight, held back from that, an instinct that had nothing to do with the strange new power, and everything to do with the boy he'd always been, the one who still remembered what it felt like to be the one everyone else looked down on, the one who didn't ever want to become the kind of person who hurt others just because he suddenly could. By the time Sakura and Sasuke dropped down from the tree line to join him, the fight was already over. The three enemy genin sprawled in various states of dazed disarray around the ravine floor, none of them seriously hurt, all of them very clearly not interested in continuing the confrontation. "We're leaving," the girl with the braid said shakily, helping the wiry boy to his feet. "Keep the scroll. We don't want any part of..." Her eyes flicked toward Naruto, toward his still strange, gold-ringed eyes, and something in her expression made him feel, for just a second, like something other than human. Whatever that is. They fled into the trees without looking back. Naruto stood in the middle of the ravine, breathing hard, not from exertion, exactly, more from the strange rush of adrenaline still coursing through him, and looked down at the heaven scroll case clutched in his hand. "We got it," he said, and there was real disbelief in his voice, like some part of him hadn't quite expected it to work. We actually got it. You went off on your own, Sasuke said, dropping down beside him, arms crossed, expression somewhere between irritation and grudging approval. That was reckless. It worked, didn't it, this time? Sasuke's dark eyes moved over him, assessing, cataloging. You caught a thrown kunai out of the air without even looking like you were trying. You dodged a ground collapse trap that should have taken your legs off. What else can you do that we don't know about yet? I don't know, Naruto admitted, and some of the triumph drained out of his voice, replaced by the same uneasy uncertainty that had been sitting in his chest since the night before. I didn't know I could do any of that until I was already doing it. It's like, my body just knows things my brain hasn't caught up to yet. Sakura had come to stand beside them both, scroll case retrieved and safely stowed in her pack alongside their earth scroll, and she was studying Naruto with the same careful, worried attention she'd worn since the moment his eyes had first opened, strange and gold and slitted, in that first clearing. Naruto, she said quietly. How do you feel? Right now? Honestly. He considered the question for a long moment, turning it over, trying to find an honest answer underneath the adrenaline and the confusion and the small, stubborn ember of pride he couldn't quite stamp out at having pulled off something that impressive, however unintentionally. Tired, he admitted finally. Really tired, actually, now that you mention it. Not like normal tired. It's like all that came from somewhere, you know? Like I borrowed it, and now I owe it back. As if his own words had given his body permission to finally register the cost. A wave of exhaustion crashed over him all at once, his knees buckling slightly before he caught himself against a nearby tree trunk, breath suddenly short, vision swimming at the edges. Naruto! Sakura was at his side in an instant, one arm bracing under his shoulder, and even Sasuke had taken a quick step forward, expression tightening with something that looked, for just a moment, genuinely alarmed. I'm okay, Naruto managed, though his voice came out thinner than he wanted it to. I'm okay, I think I need to sit down for a second. They found a spot a short distance from the ravine, tucked beneath the broad canopy of another ancient tree, and Sakura eased him down against the roots with more gentleness than he'd have expected from her, given how often she still rolled her eyes at his antics on an ordinary day. You pushed too hard, she said, unpacking a small camp stove and a battered kettle from her supplies with brisk, efficient movements. Whatever that power is, it's not free. You just found that out the hard way. I noticed, Naruto muttered, letting his head fall back against the tree trunk, eyes sliding shut. Even with them closed, the world still felt sharper than it used to, sounds and scents and the faint, warm pressure of chakra signatures nearby registering in ways he was only beginning to understand. He heard the quiet clink of the kettle, the small hiss of water beginning to warm over the tiny stove flame, and a few minutes later felt the press of a warm cup into his hands. Here, Sakura said. Drink this. It'll help. He opened his eyes to find a simple cup of tea, plain and unsweetened, steam curling up from its surface in the cool forest air. It wasn't anything special. She'd probably packed the same dried leaves half the Genin teams carried, cheap and practical, meant more for warmth and comfort than any particular flavor. But there was something in the gesture itself, the simple, deliberate care of it, that loosened something tight in Naruto's chest. Thanks, he said quietly, wrapping both hands around the cup and letting its warmth seep into his palms. Sakura settled down across from him, her own cup cradled in her hands, and for a while none of them spoke, Sasuke standing a short distance away, keeping watch over the tree line with his usual quiet vigilance, occasionally glancing back at the two of them with an expression Naruto couldn't quite read. You know, Sakura said eventually, breaking the silence, I've been thinking about what that voice told you. About your bloodline. Naruto's grip tightened slightly around the cup. Yeah? I don't think it's something to be scared of, she said, choosing her words carefully, the way she always did when she'd actually thought something through rather than just reacting. I mean, it's scary, obviously, all of it happening the way it did, that woman, the pain, not knowing what you're turning into. That part's terrifying. But the actual fact of having a bloodline, of being connected to something like that, that's not automatically a bad thing. Sasuke has the Sharingan. The Hyuga have the Byakugan. Bloodlines aren't monsters, Naruto. They're just, part of who you are. Same as the fox is part of who you are, even though it isn't all of who you are. It feels different, Naruto said quietly, staring down into his tea. The fox, I've always known it was there, even before I really understood what it meant. It was just a fact of my life, like having spiky hair or being loud. This is different. This is something new happening to my actual body, changing what I look like, changing what I can do, and I don't have any control over it. I don't know what it's gonna turn me into. Sasuke, from where he stood keeping watch, spoke without turning around. Then figure out how to control it. Naruto blinked, glancing up at him. What? You heard me. Sasuke's voice was matter-of-fact, almost clinical, but there was something underneath it that Naruto hadn't heard from him before, a kind of grim solidarity, forged in the shared, private terror of carrying something dangerous and half-understood inside your own skin. You're not the only one who got marked yesterday. I don't know what this thing on my neck is going to do to me either, but I'm not going to just sit around waiting to find out. I'm going to figure out how to control it before it controls me. He glanced back over his shoulder, dark eyes meeting Naruto's strange gold-ringed ones. You should do the same. For a moment, the two of them simply looked at each other, two 12-year-old boys, each carrying something ancient and dangerous inside their own bodies, each terrified in their own quiet way, each too stubborn to admit it out loud. Then Naruto managed a small, tired smile. Yeah, he said. Okay. We figure it out. Together. Sasuke's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough to count for him. Sakura watched the exchange with something soft and relieved settling into her own expression, and reached over to refill Naruto's cup from the kettle without being asked. Drink your tea, she said. Then we rest properly this time. We've got a scroll now. We can afford to actually take care of ourselves before we push toward the tower. Naruto obeyed, sipping the warm, plain tea slowly, feeling the exhaustion in his limbs settle into something less alarming, more manageable, the ordinary tiredness of a hard day's work rather than the frightening, bone-deep depletion he'd felt back in the ravine. Around them, the forest continued its slow, watchful breathing, indifferent as ever to the small dramas of the Genin sheltering beneath its ancient canopy. But for the first time since the woman's attack, since his eyes had opened gold and strange in that first clearing, Naruto found himself feeling something other than fear when he thought about what he'd become. Not quite acceptance. Not yet, but something adjacent to it, the first thin thread of a much longer, much harder journey toward understanding exactly what, and who, he was going to choose to be, now that the choice had been so violently thrust upon him. He finished his tea in silence, watched the last of the daylight fade gold and green through the canopy above, and for the first time in over a day, let himself close his eyes and simply rest, trusting his team to keep watch, trusting himself, however uncertainly, to wake up tomorrow and figure out one more piece of the strange, unfinished puzzle he now carried inside his own blood. Far to the west, in a quiet tower overlooking a village he could not see from here, an old man kept his own vigil, watching, waiting, already setting in motion the first careful steps toward answers that had been buried for far too long. And somewhere out in the vast, dark expanse of the forest of death, a pale woman with golden eyes smiled to herself in the growing dark, and thought, with quiet, patient satisfaction, that the seed she had planted seemed, after all, to be taking root rather nicely. They reached the tower on the morning of the third day. It rose out of the trees without warning, the way most things in the forest of death seemed to. One moment there was only canopy and gloom stretching in every direction. And the next the trees thinned and there it was, a squat, weathered stone structure standing in a wide clearing like something that had grown there rather than been built, its walls streaked green with old moss, a heavy set of doors marked with the kanji for heaven and earth set into the stone above the entrance. That's it, Sakura said, and there was real relief in her voice, the particular exhausted relief of someone who has been holding themselves together through sheer will for 3 days straight, and has just glimpsed the finish line. That's actually it. Don't get excited yet, Sasuke said, though even he couldn't quite keep the edge of tension out of his shoulders as they approached. We still need to open both scrolls together, and we don't know what happens after that. After that, Naruto said, we get food that isn't dried fish and rest somewhere that isn't a hole in a rock. I don't care what happens after that. They crossed the clearing together, and Naruto found himself glancing back toward the tree line more than once, some new, Restless part of him that hadn't existed 3 days ago, still half convinced that something was watching from the shadows, tracking their progress with patient, golden interest. He hadn't told the others how often he felt it, that faint, prickling awareness at the edges of his senses, the sensation of being observed in a way he couldn't quite pin down to any specific direction. He wasn't even entirely sure it was real and not just leftover nerves from the ambush. But the feeling hadn't faded in 3 days, and some old, animal part of him had learned, over a lifetime of being watched with suspicion by people who never once bothered to actually know him, not to entirely dismiss a feeling like that. Inside the tower, the air was cooler, dimmer, and heavy with the particular hush of old stone. A wide chamber greeted them, its walls lined with faded murals depicting the balance of heaven and earth, sky and soil, wind and mountain, imagery Naruto only half registered, too tired and too eager to be done with the forest to spend much time admiring the artwork. Open them together, Sakura said, already unwrapping the paper from both scroll cases with careful, precise movements. That's what the instructions said. Both scrolls, at the same time. They laid the 2 scrolls side by side on the stone floor and unrolled them together. For a moment, nothing happened, and Naruto felt a flicker of anxious doubt. What if we did it wrong? What if this is another trap? Before the characters written on both scrolls began to glow, faint and gold, lifting off the paper in curling wisps of chakra that gathered and thickened in the air above them, resolving, with a soft pop of displaced air, into the shape of a man. Iruka Umino stood in the center of the chamber, blinking in mild surprise at his own sudden appearance, before his expression softened into the warm, familiar smile Naruto had known since he was small. Naruto, Iruka said, and something in his voice carried real relief. You made it, Iruka-sensei. Naruto's exhaustion momentarily forgotten, he crossed the chamber in a few quick strides, grinning wide. You're the summon? That's actually really, it's good to see you too. Iruka's gaze moved briefly over the 3 of them, cataloging the state they were in, the dirt, the exhaustion, the faint bruising along Sakura's jaw where she'd taken a hit during the ambush 2 days prior, before settling, with a flicker of something more careful and searching, on Naruto's face. Naruto watched him notice. Watched the small pause, the almost imperceptible widening of his old teacher's eyes as he took in the gold-ringed, slitted irises that hadn't faded once in 3 full days. Naruto, Iruka said slowly, your eyes. Yeah. Naruto rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly self-conscious in a way he hadn't quite let himself be around his teammates anymore. 3 days of shared exhaustion and shared danger having worn down most of the awkwardness between them. It's a long story. Iruka's expression didn't shift into fear, the way Naruto had half-braced for, didn't shift into the wary, careful blankness some adults in the village wore whenever the fox came up, however obliquely. Instead it settled into something more like concern, warm and immediate, and entirely focused on Naruto himself rather than on whatever the fox represented to the rest of the village. Then you'll tell me the long story, Iruka said, once you've eaten something and rested properly. Congratulations, all 3 of you, you've passed the 2nd stage. Go inside, get settled, and I'll make sure the proctors know you'll need someone to look you over. All of you. His eyes flicked briefly to the faint mark still visible at the edge of Sasuke's collar, and something tightened at the corner of his mouth, though he said nothing further about it in front of the Genin. Rest first. Talk later. The summon dissolved back into wisps of chakra, and the far door of the chamber swung open, revealing a corridor leading deeper into the tower. They passed the following 2 days inside the tower in a state of cautious, grateful recovery. Real meals, provided by the exam staff, simple and plain but hot and plentiful. Plates of rice and vegetables and grilled chicken, cups of warm tea replacing the meager rations they'd been surviving on in the forest. Real beds, or close enough to real beds, in a shared dormitory room set aside for Genin teams who'd cleared the 2nd stage early. And most gratefully of all, real safety, walls and proctors and the general absence of anyone trying to kill them for the scroll in their possession. Sakura spent much of the first day simply sleeping, catching up on 3 days of near-constant vigilance in long, deep stretches that left her looking younger and less haunted by the time she finally woke. Sasuke kept mostly to himself, training quietly in a corner of the tower's small courtyard when he thought no one was watching, movements careful and controlled in a way that made Naruto suspect he was testing something. Testing his own body, testing the marks on his neck, testing whatever the curse seal might or might not have changed about the way his chakra moved. Naruto, for his part, found himself restless in a way sleep didn't seem to fully address. His body still ached with the particular fatigue of 3 hard days in the forest. But underneath that ordinary tiredness, that strange new well of energy he'd discovered during the ambush against the enemy Genin hadn't gone away. If anything, after 2 days of rest and real food, it had settled into something steadier, more present, a low hum at the edges of his senses that made sitting still feel almost physically uncomfortable, like wearing a shirt one size too small. On the evening of the second day, unable to settle, he went looking for Kakashi. He found his teacher in a quiet corner of the tower's upper level, seated on a low windowsill with his ever-present orange book held loosely in one hand, though Naruto noticed, on approach, that his teacher's visible eye wasn't actually tracking the page. Kakashi had been sitting there thinking, apparently, using the book as cover the way he so often did. Naruto. Kakashi didn't look up right away, though there was no missing the way his shoulders shifted, subtly alert, the moment Naruto's footsteps sounded in the corridor. Come to complain about the food? I heard it's not up to your usual ramen standards. The food's fine, Naruto said, settling onto the windowsill beside him, the false cheer in his teacher's voice not quite enough to distract him from the actual reason he'd come looking. Kakashi-sensei, I need to ask you something. Kakashi closed the book, finally, and turned his full attention on Naruto. And there it was again, that brief, careful pause as his teacher's single visible eye took in the strangeness of Naruto's gaze, the gold ring and slitted pupil that 3 days hadn't managed to fade. I already know what you're going to ask, Kakashi said quietly. Irika sent word ahead. I saw the reports. Then you know I'm not asking about the fox. Naruto's voice came out sharper than he intended, some of the frustration of the last 3 days finally finding an outlet. Everyone keeps assuming it's the fox. It's not. I know what the fox feels like, Kakashi-sensei. This is something else, and nobody will tell me what. For a long moment, Kakashi was quiet, gaze drifting out the narrow window toward the darkening forest canopy beyond the tower's walls, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost most of its usual lazy, deflecting warmth, replaced by something more careful. Honestly? He said. I don't fully know either. Not yet. What I know is that the woman who attacked you and Sasuke is almost certainly Orochimaru, one of the most dangerous missing nin this village has ever produced, and that the curse seal he placed on Sasuke is something we understand, grimly, unfortunately, but we understand its general shape and its general danger. What he did to you, though? Kakashi shook his head slowly. That's not something I've seen before, and that concerns me more than I'd like to admit, because Orochimaru rarely does anything without a clear, calculated purpose. Naruto's stomach twisted. You think he did this to me on purpose? That he knew somehow that I'd have this in me? I don't know, Kakashi admitted. It's possible he was simply testing you, the way a predator tests any prey it encounters, looking for weakness or opportunity. It's also possible he knew more about your bloodline than either of us currently does, and chose to provoke it deliberately. His visible eye settled back on Naruto, steady and unusually serious. Lord Third has already been informed. He's taking this seriously, Naruto. More seriously than I think you realize. There are people looking into it, carefully, quietly, trying to understand exactly what's happened to you and why. Why can't anyone just tell me? The frustration in Naruto's voice cracked, just slightly, into something more raw and young underneath it. It's happening to my body. Why does everyone else get to know things about it before I do? Kakashi's expression softened, just slightly, an unusual enough sight that Naruto found himself momentarily distracted from his own frustration. Because, Kakashi said, some of what we suspect concerns your family. Your actual, biological family. Not the fox, not the seal, but the blood you were born with, before any of that was ever placed inside you. And that's not information the village has ever handled carefully where you're concerned, Naruto. I won't pretend otherwise. There are political reasons, old grudges, old fears, tangled up in the truth of your parentage that go back further than either of us has any control over. Lord Third has protected you from a great deal of that, for your own safety, for longer than you know. What's happening now, this awakening, whatever it turns out to be, It's forcing some of those old secrets closer to the surface faster than anyone anticipated. And that makes people cautious. Sometimes too cautious, I'll grant you. But not without reason. Naruto sat with that for a long moment, processing it as best he could, old, familiar frustration warring with a new, cautious flicker of something that felt almost like hope. My family, he said finally, quietly. You're saying I actually have one. Had one. Whatever the right word is. Everyone has one, Naruto, Kakashi said. Even you. Especially you, as it turns out, more of one than most people realize, I suspect. He reached out, briefly, and rested a hand on Naruto's shoulder, an unusually direct gesture for a man who mostly kept his affection at arm's length, wrapped in irony and deflection. I know it's hard to be patient about this. I know you've spent your whole life with nothing but silence where answers should have been. But I promise you, this time, the silence isn't because no one cares enough to tell you. It's because the people who care about you most are trying to be careful with something fragile and dangerous, and they don't want to get it wrong. Naruto swallowed hard, throat tight, and nodded, not trusting his voice for a moment. Okay, he said finally. Okay. I can wait a little longer. But you have to promise me, Kakashi-sensei. When you do know something, you tell me. All of it. Not the parts you think I can handle. All of it. Kakashi's visible eye crinkled, something that might have been the ghost of a real, unguarded smile. I promise, he said. All of it, when the time is right. It wasn't everything Naruto wanted. But it was more than he'd had an hour ago, and for now, exhausted and strange in his own changing skin, he let it be enough. That same night, in the Hokage's tower, a very different conversation was taking place. Kakashi had sent his report ahead by Hawk before he'd even finished speaking with Naruto, and by the time the old Hokage received it, he'd already summoned the one person in the village whose knowledge of the world's scattered clans and vanished bloodlines exceeded even his own considerable expertise. Jiraiya arrived at the tower a little past midnight, travel-worn from a hasty journey back from wherever his research had taken him this time, and dropped into the chair across from the Hokage's desk with none of his usual theatrical flourish, expression uncharacteristically grave. You said it was urgent, Jiraiya said, without preamble. Tell me it's not what I think it is. I don't know what you think it is, Hiruzen said, sliding a folder of hastily compiled notes across the desk, but I suspect it may be worse. Jiraiya scanned the notes quickly, his expression shifting from mild concern to something sharper, more focused. As he read, the description of the chakra signature Hiruzen had glimpsed through the crystal ball, the marks that had briefly traced along Naruto's skin, Kakashi's more recent report on the boy's altered eyes, altered strength, altered senses. Dragon-blooded, Jiraiya murmured, almost to himself, setting the folder down with the careful, deliberate slowness of a man buying himself time to think. You think it's actually dragon-blooded? I think, Hiruzen said carefully, that we cannot rule it out, and that we owe it to the boy to find out for certain rather than continuing to guess in the dark. You know more about the old bloodlines than anyone alive in this village, Jiraiya. What do you actually know about the Ryujin lineage? Jiraiya was quiet for a long moment, gaze drifting toward the window, toward the dark shape of the village spread out below, before he answered. Less than I'd like, he admitted. Most of what survives is fragments, old texts, half-verified rumors, the kind of thing you find scattered across a dozen different archives in a dozen different villages. None of it complete, most of it contradictory. But the broad shape of the story is this: centuries ago, before the great villages as we know them even existed, there were clans scattered across the continent who claimed direct descent from ancient, non-human bloodlines, clans who could, under the right conditions, manifest traits and abilities that had nothing to do with conventional chakra training. Enhanced senses. Enhanced durability. In the most extreme, well-documented cases, partial physical transformation. His mouth twisted, something between old fascination and old grief. The Ryujin clan was one of the most storied of these, said to carry the blood of dragons, quite literally, passed down through generations, though how much of that is literal truth and how much is myth built up over centuries of storytelling, I genuinely can't say for certain. What happened to them? War, Jiraiya said simply. The same thing that happened to most of the old scattered bloodline clans. back before the great villages brought some measure of order to how shinobi settled their disputes. Powerful bloodlines make powerful enemies, and powerful enemies rarely stop at simply defeating a clan on the battlefield. They tend to want the bloodline gone entirely, so it can never threaten them again. The Ryujin clan, as far as any of my research has ever confirmed, was hunted nearly to extinction generations ago. What few survivors remained scattered, hid, intermarried with other clans and other villages, until the bloodline itself became so diluted, so buried under generations of ordinary human ancestry, that most scholars consider it functionally extinct. A story? A myth. Not a living thing anymore. And yet, Hiruzen said quietly, here we are. Jiraiya's expression darkened. Here we are, he agreed. Which raises the question neither of us particularly wants to ask out loud, old friend. His mother's line, Hiruzen said before Jiraiya could voice it himself, because some truths were easier to speak when you were the one choosing the words. The Uzumaki clan, scattered, nearly extinguished themselves, generations ago, by their own set of powerful enemies, a clan famous, in what little history survives of them, for bloodlines and chakra so vast and so strange that entire villages allied against them out of simple fear. It would fit, Jiraiya said heavily. It would fit disturbingly well, in fact. If the Ryujin bloodline survived anywhere, scattered and diluted and buried under generations of intermarriage, the Uzumaki clan, with their history of drawing in and absorbing fragments of other rare bloodlines through alliance and marriage over the centuries, would be exactly the kind of place it might have ended up. Hidden. Dormant. Waiting. Waiting for what? Jiraiya was quiet for a long moment, turning the question over. For the right catalyst, perhaps, he said finally. Dormant bloodlines don't always announce themselves gradually, the way the Sharingan or the Byakugan tend to develop with training and maturity. Sometimes they need a trigger, extreme trauma, extreme chakra exposure, something that forces the body past its ordinary limits and gives whatever's sleeping in the blood a reason, or an opportunity, to wake. He glanced back down at the notes, at the description of Orochimaru's attack, of the strange secondary chakra surge that had accompanied the curse seal's placement. If Orochimaru's chakra, layered with whatever the fox's own presence was already doing to the boy's chakra network, created exactly the kind of extreme, destabilizing pressure a dormant bloodline might need to finally break through, then Orochimaru may have unknowingly done what generations of careful Uzumaki secrecy failed to prevent. Hiruzen finished grimly. Woken something that clan spent centuries hiding, for reasons we can likely guess at even without complete records. To protect it, Jiraiya said. Or to protect the world from it. Possibly both at once, knowing how that clan tended to think about their own power. He rubbed a hand over his face, looking, for a moment, every one of his considerable years. This complicates things significantly, old friend. A boy carrying the nine tails is dangerous enough. Politically, every hidden village in the world would like to see that particular asset either controlled or eliminated, given half a reason. A boy who also carries a bloodline once so feared it drove multiple villages to unite against a single clan just to see it extinguished. Precisely why this cannot become public knowledge, Hiruzen said, voice hardening with the particular firmness of a man who had spent decades protecting difficult truths for the sake of people too young to protect themselves. Not yet. Not until we understand far more than we currently do, and not until the boy himself has had time to come to terms with what's happening to him, on his own terms, without the added weight of an entire village's fear and ambition bearing down on him before he's even finished growing into whatever he's becoming. Jiraiya nodded slowly. I'll go to him, he said. Once the exams are finished, sooner, if you think it wise, though I suspect pulling him out mid-exam would raise more questions than it answers. I'll go to him. And I'll teach him what I can, and I'll try to help him understand what he's carrying before it becomes a burden heavier than any 12-year-old should have to bear alone. Thank you, Hiruzen said quietly, and for a moment the weight of decades, of promises made to two people long dead, of a boy who deserved so much better than the isolation the village had forced on him, settled visibly across his shoulders. He's already carried more than his fair share alone, Jiraiya. I would very much like this, at least, not to be one more thing he faces without anyone standing beside him. He won't be alone, Jiraiya said, with a quiet, unusual firmness. Not this time. I owe him that much, at the very least, for his father's sake, if nothing else. Outside the window, the village lay dark and quiet beneath a wide, star-scattered sky, entirely unaware of the old, careful conversation taking place above it, or of the strange, ancient inheritance slowly stirring awake in the blood of a boy currently 3 days deep into the largest test of his young life. Back at the tower, unable to sleep, Naruto slipped out into the small stone courtyard sometime past midnight, moonlight spilling pale and cool across the worn flagstones. He hadn't intended to train. His body was still recovering, still carrying the deep ache of 3 hard days in the forest. But the restless energy humming beneath his skin refused to settle into anything resembling rest, and eventually he gave up trying to force it and simply let himself move, slow and careful at first, testing the strange new edges of his own body in the quiet privacy of the empty courtyard. He started simply enough, a few basic stretches, a few practice throws with a spare kunai he'd borrowed from Sasuke's supply. But even these small, ordinary motions felt different now, sharper and more precise than they had a week ago, his body responding to his intentions with a fluidity that would have seemed impossible before the forest. Curious, he closed his eyes and reached, not with his hands, not with any technique Iruka or Kakashi had ever taught him, but with something else entirely, some new, unnamed sense that had been quietly present at the edges of his awareness ever since that first night in the overhang, waiting for him to actually notice it and use it on purpose. The world unfolded around him in a way he had no good words for. It wasn't sight, not exactly, though it shared something with sight, a kind of map, spreading outward from where he stood, built not out of light and shadow but out of warmth. Faint traces of heat and chakra and living presence scattered across the tower, and its surrounding grounds like a constellation only he could see. He could feel Sakura, asleep in the dormitory 2 floors up, her chakra signature calm and even in the deep rhythm of Ryo rest. He could feel Sasuke, restless even in sleep, his signature flickering unevenly, threaded through with something darker and more volatile that made Naruto's stomach tighten with worry even from this distance. He could feel, more distantly, the faint scattered presence of other Genin teams resting elsewhere in the tower, and further out still, at the very edge of what he could sense, the vast, ancient, watchful presence of the forest itself, alive with 1,000 small heartbeats, moving through the dark canopy. Impressive, said a voice behind him. Most shinobi spend years training before they can hold a sensory range like that, and even then rarely without hand seals to anchor the technique. Naruto's eyes snapped open, and he spun, kunai coming up on pure reflex, only to find, standing at the edge of the courtyard, an old man he had never seen before in his life. He was small, stooped with age, dressed in simple, unassuming gray robes with long sleeves and modest, plain lines, the kind of clothing that gave away nothing about rank or affiliation. His hair, what remained of it, was white and thin, swept back from a weathered, deeply lined face, and his eyes, Naruto's breath caught slightly as he registered it. His eyes were an odd, pale amber color, not slitted like Naruto's own had become, but carrying a strange, old quality nonetheless, like something that had seen far more of the world than any ordinary lifetime should allow. "Who are you?" Naruto demanded, kunai still raised, every instinct honed by the last 3 days screaming caution. "How'd you get in here?" "This is a restricted area during the exams." The old man's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, amused, but tired, the expression of someone who found very little in the world genuinely surprising anymore. "My name isn't important right now," the old man said, voice raspy but steady, carrying a faint accent Naruto couldn't quite place. "What's important is that I felt something, 3 nights ago, out there in that forest, a chakra signature I haven't sensed in this world for a very, very long time. I came to see if I was right to feel concerned." "You felt?" Naruto's grip on the kunai loosened, just slightly, some instinct beneath his suspicion recognizing that this old man wasn't a threat, exactly, whatever else he might be. "You know what happened to me?" "I know what I sensed," the old man corrected carefully, moving closer with the slow, measured steps of age, though there was nothing frail about the way he carried himself, nothing that suggested weakness beneath the stooped posture. "Whether it matches what actually happened to you, I'd need to see for myself." His pale amber eyes moved over Naruto's face, lingering on the gold-ringed, slitted quality of his changed gaze with an intensity that made Naruto want to look away, though he forced himself to hold still under the scrutiny. "May I?" May you what? Look closer. Naruto hesitated, every hard-won lesson of his short, wary life urging caution around strangers who appeared out of nowhere with knowledge they shouldn't have. But something in the old man's manner, patient, unhurried, entirely without the fear or suspicion Naruto had grown so used to seeing in adults' eyes, made him lower the kunai, slowly, and nod. The old man approached and studied him for a long, silent moment, close enough now that Naruto could see the faint, old scarring along one side of his weathered face, half hidden beneath the collar of his robe, scars that looked, on closer inspection, disturbingly similar in shape and pattern to the faded traceries Naruto had glimpsed on his own skin that first night in the forest. You have those too, Naruto said quietly, before he could stop himself. The marks. Whatever they are. The old man's expression shifted, something complicated passing behind his pale amber eyes. I did once, he said. A very, very long time ago. They faded, over the decades, the way most things fade eventually, but the blood beneath them never fully quiets, not truly. It simply learns, over enough years, to sleep more soundly. His gaze sharpened, focusing more directly on Naruto. Tell me, boy. Do you hear a voice? Something old, and slow, and patient, nothing like your own thoughts? Naruto's breath caught. You know about the voice. I know about the voice, the old man confirmed, and something in his weathered face softened, just slightly, into an expression that looked almost like relief, or perhaps grief, or some tangled combination of both. Because I heard it too, once, when I was younger than you are now. It has been a very long time since I met anyone else who could say the same. What is it? Naruto's voice cracked, all his careful suspicion momentarily forgotten in the face of finally speaking to someone who might actually have real answers. What's happening to me? Please, nobody will tell me anything, not really, everyone just looks at me like I'm some kind of problem they need to carefully manage, and I just want to understand what I am. The old man was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those strange amber eyes, and when he finally spoke, his voice had gone gentler, though no less serious. You are the last living thread of a bloodline the world worked very hard to unravel, many generations ago, he said. A bloodline that carried, in its oldest and purest expressions, the blood and the memory of dragons, not the small, ordinary creatures some storytellers imagine when they hear that word, but something vaster and stranger, tied to the old world in ways modern Shinozukuri and their careful chakra theories have mostly forgotten how to understand. His gaze drifted, briefly, toward the dark shape of the forest beyond the tower's walls. The voice you hear is not a separate spirit, the way the Ninetales is a separate spirit sealed inside you. It is closer to a memory, ancestral, inherited, carried in the blood itself and passed down through countless generations until it finally found, in you, a vessel capable of holding it fully awake once more. Why me? Naruto asked, quiet and raw. Why now? I don't fully know, the old man admitted. Bloodlines like this one rarely wake gently, or by simple choice. They wake in moments of extremity, when the body carrying them is pushed to the very edge of what it can survive, and something ancient in the blood decides that survival is worth the risk of finally, fully emerging. His eyes moved briefly, to the faint scar visible at Naruto's collar, the mark of the choking grip that had nearly ended his life in that first clearing. Whatever happened to you 3 nights ago, boy? It seems your blood decided you were worth waking for. Naruto sat with that for a long moment, the courtyard silent around them except for the faint whisper of whine through the trees beyond the tower's walls. Will you teach me? He asked finally. How to control it. How to understand what it's turning me into. The old man's expression turned careful again, weighing something Naruto couldn't quite read. I can offer you guidance, he said slowly. Fragments of what I learned, decades ago, before my own portion of this inheritance faded back into dormancy. But I won't lie to you, boy. I am old, and what I remember is incomplete, and there is no one left in this world, as far as I know, who can teach you the fullness of what you're carrying. You will have to learn much of it yourself, through trial and instinct, and, likely, no small amount of pain. His pale amber eyes held Naruto's strange gold-ringed ones with quiet, unflinching honesty. Is that a price you're willing to pay, for understanding? Naruto thought of the last 3 days. The fear, the confusion, the strange new strength that had saved his team and terrified him in almost equal measure, the aching loneliness of carrying something no one around him could fully explain. Yeah, he said, quiet but certain. Yeah, it is. I've paid worse prices for less, believe it. Something in the old man's weathered face shifted, softened, into an expression that looked, for just a moment, almost proud. Then we begin, he said, with breath and with stillness. The same place every dragon-blooded child before you has had to begin, whether they knew it or not. Sit. Naruto sat, cross-legged on the cool stone flagstones, moonlight spilling silver across the courtyard, and for the first time since the woman's golden eyes had found him in that first clearing 3 days ago, he let himself hope, cautiously, quietly, but genuinely, that he might, eventually, come to understand exactly what he was, and choose, deliberately and on his own terms, exactly who he wanted to become because of it. The old man settled across from him, folding his stooped frame down with more ease than his age suggested, and began, in a low, steady voice, to speak of breath, and blood, and the very old, very patient art of listening to something ancient enough to remember when the world itself had been young. The remaining 2 days before the end of the second stage passed in a strange, suspended rhythm, training in the small hours before dawn with the old man, whose name Naruto still didn't know and had stopped bothering to ask for, meals and rest with his team through the daylight hours, and always, underneath everything, that low, patient hum of new awareness humming at the edges of his senses, gradually becoming less like an alarm and more like simply another sense, the way sight or hearing had always been. Breathe from here, the old man told him, on their second night together, pressing 2 fingers gently against the center of Naruto's chest, just below the sternum. Not from your lungs alone. The dragon blood does not answer to ordinary breath. It answers to intention carried on breath, the difference between air moving through you and air moving with you. Naruto had tried, and failed, and tried again, sitting cross-legged on the cool courtyard stones while the old man watched with patient, unhurried attention, offering small corrections here and there, never raising his voice, never showing the flicker of frustration Naruto had half expected from a teacher working with a student this stubbornly bad at sitting still. By the second night, he managed something. Not full control, not anything close to it, but a faint, deliberate warmth he could call up in his chest at will, a small taste of the vast well of power that had nearly overwhelmed him in that first clearing, now, for just a few seconds at a time, actually his to direct rather than something that simply happened to him. Good, the old man said, when Naruto finally managed to hold the warmth steady for a full 10 seconds before it guttered out, leaving him breathless and grinning despite the exhaustion dragging at his limbs. That is the first true step. Everything else, the strength, the senses, whatever else your particular bloodline chooses to grant you, all of it will come easier once you've learned to hold that small, steady flame without losing yourself in it. How do you know so much about this? Naruto asked, not for the first time, though he already half expected the same careful deflection he'd received the first 2 times he'd asked. This time, though, the old man was quiet for a long moment, gazing up at the stars visible through the gap in the tower's courtyard walls, before he answered. Because I carried a fragment of the same blood, once, he said slowly. A smaller fragment than yours, I suspect, diluted by more generations than yours has been, enough to grant me some of what you're now discovering, but never enough to fully awaken the way yours seems to have done. I spent my whole youth chasing a fire that never quite caught, boy, watching you find in 3 days what took me 30 years to even partially understand. It is a strange thing to witness. Humbling, and a little bittersweet, if I'm honest. Bittersweet how? The old man's mouth curved into something wry and tired. Because the world that could have taught you properly no longer exists, he said. Because whatever you become, you will largely have to discover it alone, the way I did, except with far higher stakes and far less patience allowed to you by the world around you. I can give you fragments, boy. Breath and stillness, and warnings about what not to do when the fire runs too hot. But the rest you will have to earn through your own trial, the same as every dragon-blooded child before you, going back further than even the oldest surviving records remember. Naruto absorbed this in silence, watching the stars, feeling the strange new weight of inheritance settle a little more firmly across his shoulders, not lighter, exactly, for knowing more about it, but somehow more bearable, the way any burden becomes easier to carry once you at least understand its shape. I'm gonna master it, he said finally, quiet but fierce. Whatever it takes. I'm not gonna let it control me. I'm gonna control it. The old man studied him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his pale amber eyes, before he nodded slowly. I believe you might, at that, he said. Stubbornness, it turns out, may be worth more than talent, where blood like this is concerned. On the morning of the 5th day, the remaining Genin teams who had made it to the tower, fewer than half of those who'd entered the forest, Naruto noted grimly, counting the unfamiliar faces gathered in the tower's largest chamber, assembled to learn the shape of the exam's third and final stage. The third Hokage himself addressed them, standing before the assembled Genin with the calm, measured authority Naruto had always associated with him, though today there was something more careful in the old man's expression, a weight behind his eyes that Naruto, newly attuned to reading such things, perhaps, after 3 nights of training in patience and observation, found himself noticing for the first time. Before the third and final stage of these exams can begin, Hiruzen said, voice carrying easily across the chamber, we must first thin your numbers through a series of preliminary matches. 20 of you remain. The third stage, held 1 month from today before an audience of dignitaries from across the great villages, will proceed with a more manageable field. A murmur ran through the gathered Genin, some grumbling, some tense with anticipation, the particular electric mixture of relief and dread that came with learning you were about to be tested, immediately, without warning, in front of everyone who mattered. These matches will be conducted here, now, one after another, determined by random selection. The proctor, a sickly-looking Jonin named Hate, who Naruto vaguely remembered coughing his way through the earlier stages of the exam, announced, gesturing toward a large electronic board mounted on the chamber's far wall. Win, and you advance to the third stage. Lose, and your journey in this exam ends here. Understood? Naruto glanced sideways at his team. Sakura's face had gone tight with focus, mentally running through whatever mental catalog of opponents and strategies she'd been building since the exam began. Sasuke's expression was carefully blank, though Naruto noticed the faint, telltale tension in his jaw, the way his hand had drifted, once again, toward the collar hiding the marks at his neck. You okay? Naruto murmured, low enough that only Sasuke would hear. Fine, Sasuke said, too quickly to be entirely convincing. Focus on your own match. The board flickered to life, names scrolling and shuffling in a blur of electronic noise before finally settling on the first pairing. Sasuke Uchiha vs. Yora Ikado. Guess that's me, Sasuke said, stepping forward without hesitation, though Naruto caught the brief flicker of something, apprehension maybe, or simple fatigue, cross his face before he schooled it back into his usual composed mask. Good luck, Sakura called after him, and Naruto added a rough, kick his ass Sasuke. That earned him a sharp look from one of the proctors and, more gratifyingly, the faint ghost of a smirk from Sasuke himself as he descended to the arena floor below. The fight was tense from its opening moments. Sasuke's opponent, a wiry, unassuming Genin from an unfamiliar village, revealed a chakra-draining technique that visibly sapped Sasuke's strength with every touch, and for several long, anxious minutes it looked genuinely uncertain which way the match would tip. Naruto watched, fists clenched at the railing, chest tight with a worry that had nothing to do with strategy, and everything to do with the marks he knew were hidden beneath Sasuke's collar, the dark, dangerous thing that none of them fully understood yet. Then, abruptly, mid-match, something shifted. Sasuke's movements sharpened, gained a fluid, almost predatory quality that hadn't been there moments before, and Naruto felt, with the new, strange sense he'd been cultivating over the last several nights, a faint, unsettling flicker in Sasuke's chakra signature, something dark curling briefly at its edges before Sasuke visibly wrenched it back under control through sheer will, finishing the match with a decisive series of strikes that left his opponent unconscious on the arena floor. Sasuke returned to the observation balcony breathing hard, sweat slicked, and Naruto caught the brief, private glance his teammate shot toward his own collar before quickly masking the motion. You felt that, Sasuke said quietly, once he'd rejoined them, voice pitched low enough that only Naruto and Sakura would hear. Didn't you? Yeah, Naruto admitted. I felt it. It's getting stronger, Sasuke said, and for just a moment, beneath the careful composure, Naruto glimpsed real fear. The mark. It wants to be used. Then we make sure you don't have to use it, Sakura said, firm and fierce despite the tremor in her own voice. We're gonna figure this out, Sasuke. All of us. Together, remember? Sasuke didn't answer, but something in his shoulders eased, just slightly, and he nodded once before turning his attention back to the board as it flickered through another round of names. The matches continued, one after another, a blur of unfamiliar faces and unfamiliar techniques that Naruto watched with only half his attention, the rest of his focus increasingly consumed by the low, restless hum of anticipation building in his own chest as each pairing flashed across the board and each pairing, so far, failed to be his own. He watched Shikamaru Nara win through sheer, lazy strategic patience against an opponent who'd clearly underestimated him. He watched Shino Abirame dispatch an unlucky sound Genin with methodical, unsettling efficiency. He watched Ino Yamanaka's mind transfer jutsu turn what should have been an even fight into a swift, almost anticlimactic victory. He watched Hinata Hyuga, pale and visibly nervous, lose a hard-fought match against her own cousin, Niji, in a display of the Byakugan's precision that left the whole arena briefly silent, more from the coldness of Niji's victory speech than from the fight itself. Something about fate, about bloodlines determining worth, that made Naruto's jaw tighten with an anger he didn't fully examine in the moment. That's not right, he thought, watching Hinata carried off on a stretcher, watching Niji's cold, dismissive expression as he returned to the balcony. Bloodline doesn't decide who you are. It can't. It just can't work that way. He didn't have time to examine the thought further, because the board flickered again, names shuffling and settling, and this time, when it stopped, his own name was written plainly across the screen. Naruto Uzumaki vs. Kiba Inuzuka. That's you, Sakura said, unnecessarily, and Naruto felt something tighten in his chest, not quite fear, not exactly excitement either, but some tangled combination of both, sharpened by 3 days of newfound awareness of exactly how much had changed about his own body since the last time anyone had seen him fight. He glanced down at the arena floor, where Kiba Inuzuka was already descending the steps, grinning wide and confident, his Nikken partner Akamaru yipping excitedly from the small dog carrier strapped to his back. You've got this, Sakura said, squeezing his arm briefly before he turned to go. Just be careful. With whatever you use down there. People are watching. Naruto glanced up for the first time, really taking in the full scope of the observation gallery, not just his fellow genin, but rows of Jonin sensei, proctors, and, in a raised private box near the top of the chamber, a scattering of unfamiliar figures in fine robes, clan heads and village dignitaries who'd apparently arrived early to observe the preliminary rounds firsthand. Great, he thought, a fresh knot of anxiety twisting in his stomach. No pressure. I'll be careful, he said out loud, with more confidence than he entirely felt, and made his way down to the arena floor. Kiba was already waiting when Naruto arrived, arms crossed, grin sharp and predatory. So you're the one everyone's been whispering about, he said, without preamble. Something about your eyes. Naruto's jaw tightened. You gonna talk or you gonna fight? Kiba's grin widened. Cocky. I like it. Makes it more satisfying when I win. He crouched low, one hand dropping to rest against Akamaru's carrier, the small white dog already growling low with anticipation. Don't worry, I won't go too hard on you. Wouldn't want to hurt whatever's making your eyes do that. Save it, Naruto said, settling into a loose, ready stance, the low hum of restless energy in his chest sharpening now into something more focused, more present. Let's go. Hade raised a hand, coughed once, twice, and then dropped it sharply. Begin. Kiba moved first, fast and aggressive, closing the distance in a blur while Akamaru burst from the carrier in a streak of white fur, the pair falling immediately into the kind of coordinated, instinctive rhythm that spoke of years of shared training. Naruto ducked the first swipe, felt the wind of Kiba's claws pass close enough to ruffle his hair, and threw himself backward as Akamaru's smaller, faster form darted low, aiming for his legs. It was fast, faster than any of Naruto's previous opponents in the forest, faster than the enemy genin he'd taken the heaven scroll from, but for the first time since the change, Naruto found himself genuinely, deliberately testing the edges of what his new body could do, rather than simply reacting on pure instinct the way he had in that first desperate ambush. He caught Kiba's next swing on his forearm, felt the impact absorbed by something harder and more resilient than ordinary skin, and used the moment of contact to pivot, driving his elbow into Kiba's side hard enough to send him stumbling back several feet, breath knocked out of him in a startled grunt. What the? Kiba caught himself, wide-eyed, staring at Naruto with a new, wary caution that hadn't been there 30 seconds earlier. That shouldn't have. Told you, Naruto said, grinning despite himself, despite the low, careful part of his mind still monitoring every surge of the strange new energy running through him, still remembering the old man's careful warnings about fire that ran too hot, too fast. I've got some new tricks. Kiba's expression hardened, some of the earlier playful confidence giving way to real focus. Akamaru. Fong over Fong. The two of them, boy and dog, spun into a coordinated, twin tornado assault, a blur of claws and speed that Naruto had genuinely no easy answer for, forced onto pure defense as he ducked and wove and blocked what he could, catching glancing hits along his forearms and shoulders that would have hurt far worse a week ago, and now registered as little more than sharp, distant discomfort. He caught one full hit, Kiba's spinning form catching him solidly across the chest, sending him skidding backward several feet, breath knocked temporarily from his lungs, and felt, for the first time in the fight, a genuine flicker of alarm, quickly followed by something else entirely. A low, rising heat in his chest, unbidden, unwelcome. The same restless energy he'd been carefully cultivating in the courtyard now surging forward on its own, hungry for release. Not yet, he told himself, forcing air back into his lungs, forcing the rising heat back down into something manageable. Breathe. Like he taught you. Breathe, and don't lose yourself. He straightened, shook off the impact, and found Kiba watching him with narrowed, wary eyes, clearly having expected that last hit to end the match far more decisively than it had. You're tougher than you look, Kiba admitted, breathing hard from the exertion of his own attack. Fine. Let's see how tough. The fight that followed grew steadily more intense, both Genin pushing harder, faster, more aggressively, and Naruto found himself, for the first time since the awakening, genuinely testing the limits of his new strength in real combat, catching a thrown kunai out of the air without conscious thought, dodging a follow-up attack from Akamaru with a burst of speed that surprised even him, landing a solid counter-strike that sent Kiba tumbling across the arena floor. But Kiba was skilled, and stubborn, and far from finished. He rallied, called Akamaru back to his side, and the two of them settled into a more careful, calculated rhythm, probing for weaknesses, testing Naruto's new abilities with the patient, methodical caution of a hunter who'd learned, mid-fight, to respect an opponent he'd initially underestimated. Above them, in the observation gallery, Naruto was dimly aware of the crowd's growing murmur, of the low, tense hush that had fallen over the assembled Genin and Jonin alike as the fight stretched past the point most preliminary matches had lasted, the sheer physicality of it, strength, speed, resilience, clearly far beyond what anyone had expected from either combatant. Something's different about him, he heard Shikamaru mutter, from somewhere in the gallery above, voice carrying the particular flat, assessing tone he used when genuinely puzzling over something. That's not just chakra control. That's, I don't know. Something else. His eyes, someone else murmured, Ino, maybe, or one of the unfamiliar clan heirs. Have you looked at his eyes? Naruto tried not to let the murmurs distract him, tried to keep his focus entirely on Kiba, on Akamaru, on the immediate rhythm of the fight, but some small, uncomfortable part of him registered every word anyway, an old, familiar ache flaring beneath the adrenaline, the particular, exhausting awareness of being watched, whispered about, marked as different by people who didn't understand what that difference actually meant. They're not looking at me like I'm the fox, he told himself, forcing the thought through the noise of the fight, using it almost like a mantra. This is different. This isn't fear. This is just surprise, curiosity. It's not the same thing. He wasn't entirely sure he believed it. But it was enough, for now, to keep him focused. The turning point came nearly 10 minutes into the fight, when Kiba, increasingly frustrated by Naruto's unexpected resilience, increasingly desperate to end the match before his own chakra reserves ran too low, called Akamaru back to his side and, with a grim, determined expression, bit down on a small food pill, the kind Naruto vaguely recalled Kiba's clan being known for, chakra flaring visibly around him as his features sharpened, more feral, more dangerous. Time to end this, Kiba growled, voice rougher, more animal than it had been moments before. Gutsuga. He and Akamaru, the small dog, transformed, somehow, into a near-perfect double of Kiba himself, chakra flaring in matching patterns, spun into twin, overlapping tornadoes of claws and speed, converging on Naruto from two directions at once, faster and more coordinated than anything Naruto had faced yet in the fight. He tried to dodge. He genuinely tried, throwing himself sideways with every ounce of the new speed his body had granted him. But it wasn't quite enough, not against an attack this fast, this coordinated. And the twin spinning forms caught him from both sides at once, a solid, crushing impact that sent him tumbling hard across the arena floor, breath torn from his lungs, vision swimming. For a moment, sprawled on the stone floor, ears ringing, chest aching from the force of the impact, Naruto genuinely thought the fight might be over. Then something in his chest, that low, patient warmth he'd spent 3 nights carefully cultivating, surged, unbidden, in direct response to the pain and the danger, and this time, exhausted and pushed to the very edge of what his conscious control could manage, he found he didn't have the strength left to hold it back the way he had earlier in the fight. Not yet, he thought desperately, even as the heat built, spreading outward from his chest in a wave that made his skin prickle, made the world sharpen and brighten at its edges, made that old, ancient, patient voice stir at the back of his mind. I'm not ready. I don't have full control yet, please, not yet. You do not need full control, the voice said, calm and unhurried even as Naruto's body began, involuntarily, to respond to the surge of power building within it. You need only enough to survive this moment. The rest can come later. Naruto pushed himself up off the arena floor, and the crowd's murmur sharpened, abruptly, into something closer to a collective gasp. He could feel it happening without needing to see it, the faint, dark traceries spreading once again along the backs of his hands, up the line of his forearms. The same pattern he'd glimpsed fading in that first clearing 3 days ago, this time deliberately, if not entirely under his control, called forth by his own body's desperate need to survive an attack that would otherwise have ended the match then and there. Kiba, mid-recovery from his own spinning attack, staggered to a stop, eyes going wide as he took in the sight of Naruto rising, gold-ringed eyes catching the arena's overhead lights with an unnatural, faintly luminous glow, dark patterns tracing visibly along his skin. What? Kiba's voice had lost its earlier confidence entirely. What is that? Naruto didn't answer, mostly because he genuinely didn't have an answer to give, some part of him too caught up in the strange, dizzying rush of power flooding through his chest, his breath coming faster, sharper, senses sharpening further until he could hear, with startling clarity, the individual heartbeats of everyone in the arena gallery above, could feel the faint warmth of Kiba's own chakra signature like a living map spread out before him. Breathe, he told himself, fighting to hold on to the old man's careful instruction even as the power surged higher, hungrier, more insistent. Breathe from here. Not lungs alone. Intention carried on breath. He forced himself to focus, to hold the rising tide the way he'd learned in the courtyard, and though he could feel, distantly, that he wasn't entirely succeeding, that some of what was happening was still slipping past his conscious control, he managed, at least, to keep himself from being fully swept under, keeping his mind clear enough to remain, fundamentally himself. Kiba, apparently deciding that hesitation was more dangerous than continued aggression, gritted his teeth and charged again, Akamaru at his side, the two of them converging once more in a coordinated assault. This time, Naruto didn't try to dodge. He caught Kiba's clawed strike on his forearm, felt the impact land, harder now, sharper, against skin that had hardened beneath the strange dark patterns into something closer to scale than flesh, and this time it was Kiba who staggered back, wincing, shaking out a hand that had clearly taken more damage from the block than he'd expected. That's not fair, Kiba said, breathing hard, some of his earlier bravado cracking under genuine alarm. What even is that? Some kind of Kekkei Genkai? I don't fully know either, Naruto admitted, voice rougher than usual, carrying an odd, resonant quality underneath the words that made several people in the gallery above visibly flinch. But I'm not gonna lose this fight because of it. Sorry, Kiba. I've got people I need to win this for. He moved before Kiba could fully process the words, faster now, sharper, the strange new power singing through his limbs with a fluid, dangerous grace that felt, distantly, Like it belonged to someone far older and far more practiced than a 12-year-old Genin who'd only discovered this power 4 days ago. He closed the distance in a blur, caught Kiba's next strike, redirected it with an ease that sent his opponent stumbling off balance, and followed through with a strike of his own, controlled, deliberate, calibrated with a care Naruto genuinely wasn't sure, in the moment, he consciously possessed, that connected solidly enough to send Kiba sprawling, dazed, unable to immediately rise. Akamaru, whining anxiously, nosed at his fallen partner, and after a long, tense moment, Hade stepped forward, examining Kiba's condition with a practiced eye before raising a hand. Kiba Inuzuka is unable to continue, he announced, voice carrying clearly across the suddenly, deeply silent arena. Winner, Naruto Uzumaki. For a moment, Naruto simply stood there, breathing hard, the strange dark patterns still visible along his skin, gold-ringed eyes still faintly luminous in the arena's overhead lighting, and became, all at once, acutely, uncomfortably aware of the total, weighted silence hanging over the gallery above. No cheering. No applause. Just 100 pairs of eyes, Genin, Jonin, clan heirs, distant dignitaries, fixed on him with an expression he recognized instantly, painfully, from a lifetime of encountering it in the streets of the village. Not quite fear, not quite awe, some uneasy, uncertain mixture of both that made his chest tighten with an old, familiar ache. They're looking at me like I'm something, he thought, the strange power in his chest beginning, slowly, to recede now that the immediate danger had passed, leaving him exhausted and shaky and abruptly, painfully self-conscious. Not like I'm Naruto. Like I'm something. He forced himself to move, crossing the arena floor to check on Kiba, kneeling briefly beside his fallen opponent as medical Nin arrived to tend to him. Sorry, he said quietly, meaning it. You fought good. Really good. Kiba, dazed but conscious, managed a weak, wry smile. Yeah, well. Next time I'll know better than to underestimate the loud kid with the weird eyes. He winced as the medic examined his ribs, then added, more quietly, genuine curiosity breaking through the pain, seriously, though. What was that? Long story, Naruto said. I'll tell you sometime. When I actually understand it myself. He made his way back up to the observation gallery, the strange dark patterns fading fully from his skin by the time he reached the top of the stairs. His eyes, he suspected, though he had no easy way to check, still holding on to their gold-ringed strangeness, the transformation apparently not fully reversing itself the way it had that first night in the forest. Sakura met him at the top of the stairs, relief and worry warring visibly across her face. That was, Naruto, that was incredible, but also terrifying. What? I don't know, Naruto admitted, before she could finish the question, voice tired and a little unsteady. I lost control for a second there. Not all the way. But enough. Sasuke, standing a short distance away, was watching him with an expression Naruto couldn't fully read, something that looked like concern, tangled up with something that looked almost, uncomfortably, like recognition. You held it, Sasuke said quietly, once Naruto had settled beside him, breathing still a little unsteady. Barely. But you held it. That's more than I managed back in the forest. Felt pretty out of control from the inside, Naruto admitted. Everything worth having feels out of control from the inside, the first few times, Sasuke said, with the particular flat, weary authority of someone who'd already spent several days quietly wrestling with the exact same problem. Doesn't mean you're not making progress. Naruto managed a tired smile at that, some small, grateful warmth cutting through the exhausted, self-conscious ache still sitting heavy in his chest. Above them, in the raised private box reserved for clan heads and visiting dignitaries, several pairs of eyes remained fixed on him, sharp with a calculating interest that had nothing to do with concern and everything to do with opportunity. Old, careful men and women who dealt, professionally, in the currency of bloodlines and power, already beginning, quietly, to wonder exactly what rare and valuable thing had just revealed itself, unexpectedly, in the middle of a routine Chunin exam preliminary match. Naruto, exhausted and shaken and still trying to process the strange, uneasy weight of 100 watching eyes, didn't notice the particular sharpness of that attention. Not yet, but far across the gallery, tucked into the shadow of a support pillar, one elderly man in bandaged robes noted it very carefully indeed, expression giving away nothing at all of the calculations already turning, cold and deliberate, behind his single visible eye. The remaining matches passed in something of a blur for Naruto, his attention still only half present, his body slowly recovering from the strange, draining cost of the power he'd called on, his mind still turning over the memory of that heavy, uncertain silence that had greeted his victory. He watched Sakura take her own match against the Sannin Kunoichi with fierce, focused determination, winning through a combination of sharp tactical thinking and raw, stubborn will that left Naruto grinning with pride despite his own exhaustion. He watched Choji Akimichi and Rock Lee both advance through matches that showcased, in very different ways, exactly how much genuine skill and effort lay hidden beneath surfaces the village too often dismissed or underestimated. By the time the final pairing was announced and the preliminary round drew to its close, 20 genin had been narrowed down to a much smaller field of finalists, Naruto and both his teammates among them, and Hate, coughing wearily, called the assembled genin back down to the arena floor for one final announcement. "You have 1 month," he told them, before the third and final stage of these exams. "Use that time to train, to rest, to prepare, however you see fit. The matches ahead will be far more difficult than what you face today, and I strongly recommend you take this time seriously." Naruto listened, exhaustion and lingering unease slowly giving way, beneath it all, to a small, stubborn flicker of anticipation. A month. A whole month to train, to understand, to figure out, with the old man's patient guidance, with whatever else he could learn along the way, exactly what he'd become, and exactly how to hold on to himself while doing it. A month, he thought, glancing sideways at Sasuke, at the faint shadow of the curse mark visible beneath his collar, at Sakura's tired, determined face beside him. "We can do a lot with a month." As the assembled genin began filing out of the chamber, dispersing toward whatever training and preparation awaited them over the coming weeks, Naruto felt, once more, that faint prickling awareness at the edges of his senses, the sensation of being watched, deliberately, by someone whose attention carried far more weight than simple curiosity. He glanced back, scanning the thinning crowd, and for just a moment thought he caught sight of a familiar stooped, gray-robed figure near the chamber's far entrance, pale amber eyes meeting his own across the distance with an expression of quiet, unreadable approval. Then the crowd shifted, and the figure was gone, leaving Naruto to wonder, not for the first time, exactly how much the old man already knew about the road that still lay ahead.